I grew up in a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Our family ran a modest hardware store, and much of my childhood was spent stocking shelves or sweeping floors. My dad was the kind of man who believed in hard work and patience, always showing me how dedication could shape a life. Mom, on the other hand, was a teacher, constantly emphasizing compassion and the importance of learning. Between the two of them, I felt like I had a pretty solid start in life. Weekends were special. Dad and I often went fishing, just the two of us sitting by the water, casting lines and sharing quiet conversations. Sometimes the whole town seemed to gather for local events, and those moments filled me with a sense of belonging I'd carry for years. I first met Annie at one of those events, the county fair. We were teenagers, full of curiosity and hope for the future. She was fiery, ambitious, and so different from anyone I'd known before. We clicked instantly, bonding over our shared love for books and the worlds they opened up to us. Annie often talked about wanting to see the world, her eyes lighting up with excitement. I didn't share her wanderlust, but I admired her passion and determination. By the time we graduated high school, I knew I wanted her in my life forever. College was a turning point for both of us. I stayed local, studying business while working part-time to help support our growing dreams. Annie pursued her goal of becoming a nurse. Those years were tough. We lived frugally, working long hours and saving every penny. Our big break came when we bought our first house, a tiny fixer-upper. It was far from perfect, but it was ours. We spent nights painting walls and fixing leaks, often laughing at our mistakes and celebrating small victories. Looking back, those were some of the happiest days of my life. Our lives took on a new kind of joy when Sally was born. Becoming a father changed me in ways I never expected. Watching her discover the world was nothing short of magical. I took every chance to teach her about music, kindness, and the beauty of simple things. I still remember the day I gave her her first violin. She hated the sound at first, but over time she grew to love it, and I grew prouder with each passing day. As the years rolled on, life settled into a routine. My job grew more demanding, and Annie worked long hours at the hospital. We tried to keep the spark alive with date nights and family vacations, but something felt different. The passion that once burned bright had faded, replaced by a quiet familiarity. I thought it was just part of being together for so long, the natural evolution of love. Looking back now, I see that Annie was struggling in ways I didn't fully understand. I thought our life together was enough, but she yearned for something more, something I didn't even realize was missing. I always thought our life was stable, ordinary in a comforting way. Annie and I had built something solid, or at least I believed we had. Our family routines were predictable but full of meaning. Sally's music filled the house, her budding talent a source of pride. My job was steady, even if it wasn't thrilling, and I found joy in watching our daughter grow and learn. Annie seemed content too, though quieter than she used to be. I assumed it was just the exhaustion of her long shifts at the hospital. In hindsight, I see how wrong I was. It all unraveled one evening after work. I walked into the kitchen to find Annie sitting at the table, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't greet me. Her face was set in an expression I couldn't quite read, firm, determined, and cold. The usual warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by something I could only describe as distance. The silence was heavy, thick enough to choke on. I hesitated, unsure whether to speak first or wait for her to break the quiet. The longer I stood there, the more I realized this wasn't a typical post-work chat. Whatever Annie had to say, it wasn't going to be good. Finally, I joined her at the table, the tension wrapping around me like a noose. Then she said it. I want a divorce. The words didn't register at first. They sounded surreal, like they were coming from someone else entirely. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or say she was joking, but her face stayed stone cold. I've met someone else, she continued, her voice calm, almost clinical. His name is Paul. He makes me feel alive. in a way you haven't in years." The knife twisted in my chest as she spoke. Her words cut deeper with every syllable, unraveling everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I wanted to argue, to fight, to beg her to reconsider, but I was paralyzed. My mind screamed for me to say something, but my body wouldn't respond. She kept talking, her voice growing sharper, more insistent, as though she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. "You've changed, Arthur. You've grown boring, predictable. I need more than this, more than you." The ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I barely even noticed when she slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are the divorce papers," she said. "It's better if we end this cleanly. Sign them, and we can both move on." I looked down at the documents, the words blurring together. My eyes swam, the letters merging into a meaningless jumble. I couldn't process any of it. Annie's voice droned on in the background, but I couldn't hear her anymore. It was like I was trapped in a fog, sinking deeper into a place where nothing felt real. The next thing I knew, she was shouting. Her calm demeanor had cracked, and she was yelling at me to look at her, to respond, to do something. I still couldn't move. The weight of it all was suffocating. Then she slapped me. The sting brought me back to reality, if only for a moment. I reached up to touch my cheek, more out of reflex than pain. Her face was red with anger, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You can't even fight for yourself." And then, just like that, she was gone. She grabbed her purse, slammed the door behind her, and left me sitting there, alone in the dimly lit kitchen. The silence that followed was deafening. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the divorce papers. Minutes? Hours? Time lost all meaning. The world outside the window seemed so distant, like it belonged to someone else. All I could hear was the echo of Annie's words, playing on an endless loop in my head. "You're not enough. You're boring. You failed me." At some point, I reached for the bottle of wine Annie had left on the table. I poured myself a glass, then another, trying to drown the pain. But the alcohol didn't help. It only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. When Sally came home, I barely registered her presence. I vaguely remember her calling my name, shaking my shoulder, her voice tinged with panic. But I couldn't respond. I was trapped in my own head, locked away from the world around me. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. The bright fluorescent light stung my eyes, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose. Sally was there, her face pale with worry. Beside her stood my sister, Rhonda, and Tina Williams, my boss. They all looked relieved when I opened my eyes, but I could see the concern etched into their faces. "You gave us a scare," Rhonda said softly, her hand squeezing mine. "What happened, Arthur?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and my voice cracked. Slowly, the memories came flooding back. The divorce papers, Annie's words, the slap, the wine. My chest tightened, and tears pricked my eyes as I recounted everything to them. Sally's expression shifted from worry to anger as I spoke. "She left you like that?" Sally asked, her voice trembling with rage. "She just walked out and left you alone?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The shame was overwhelming. I felt weak, broken, and utterly useless. Rhonda's face darkened, her jaw tightening. "That woman has no idea what she's done," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "But she's going to find out." Over the next few days, I stayed in the hospital, surrounded by the people who cared about me. Rhonda and Tina took turns visiting, each bringing updates on my situation. It turned out that Annie had been planning this for months, maybe even years. She'd hired a lawyer and prepared the divorce papers well in advance. The revelation stung, but it also lit a fire in me, a quiet determination to regain control of my life. Tina, in particular, was a surprising source of comfort. She wasn't just my boss. She was a friend, someone who genuinely cared about my well-being. She shared stories about how I'd helped her during her own difficult divorce years ago, reminding me that I wasn't as useless as I felt. "You're stronger than this, Arthur," she said one afternoon, her piercing blue eyes meeting mine. "You've been there for so many people, including me. Now it's time to let us be there for you." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. The weight of Annie's betrayal still loomed large, suffocating me at every turn, but Tina's words planted a seed of hope, one that would grow slowly over the coming weeks. The days following my hospital stay were a blur of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and a growing resolve I didn't yet fully understand. I returned home to find the house eerily quiet, stripped of Annie's presence. Her favorite throw blanket was gone from the couch, and the coffee mug she liked had disappeared from the cupboard. It wasn't just her belongings that were missing. It felt like the warmth of our home had been sucked out as well. Sally stayed with me that first night, refusing to leave me alone. She cooked dinner, cleaned up, and even tucked me in as if I were the child and she the parent. I didn't have the heart to tell her I wasn't going to sleep that night. My mind wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Annie's face, heard her voice. "You're not enough, Arthur." The words haunted me, and no amount of reassurance from Sally or anyone else could drown them out. But I knew I had to push forward. I owed it to Sally, to myself, to reclaim some sense of normalcy, even if it felt impossible. The next morning, Rhonda arrived with coffee and a folder full of papers. "We've got work to do," she said, her tone brisk. Rhonda was a force to be reckoned with, a sharp-witted, no-nonsense attorney who had a knack for turning the tide in even the bleakest situations. She had already started dissecting Annie's divorce papers, pointing out every unreasonable demand and unfair clause. "She wants half of everything," Rhonda said, flipping through the pages. "The house, the savings, and even a portion of your bonuses. Not to mention alimony." I felt my stomach churn. "What can we do?" Rhonda's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Leave it to me. I'll make sure she doesn't walk away with a single penny more than she's entitled to. And believe me, Arthur, that's not much." Her confidence was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. While Rhonda worked on the legal front, Tina continued to be a steady presence in my life. She visited often, bringing home-cooked meals and little gifts, a book she thought I'd like, a new coffee blend to try. Her kindness was unexpected, but it warmed a part of me I thought had gone cold. One afternoon, Tina sat with me on the back porch, a thermos of tea between us. The autumn leaves were falling in vibrant shades of orange and gold, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. "Do you think she ever really loved me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tina didn't answer right away. She took a sip of her tea, her blue eyes thoughtful. "I think she did," she said finally. "But people change, Arthur, sometimes in ways we can't control or predict." Her words stung, but they also rang true. Annie had been my world for so long that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming in our foundation. By the time I realized how far we'd drifted, it was too late. "You deserved better," Tina added, her hand resting gently on mine. "And you still do." Meanwhile, Sally's anger toward her mother grew with each passing day. She refused to take Annie's calls and ignored every text message. "I tried to talk to her about it, to encourage her to keep an open mind, but she wasn't ready." "She abandoned you, Dad," Sally said one night as we sat at the dinner table. "She walked out when you needed her most. How can you even think about forgiving her?" "I'm not saying I forgive her," I replied carefully. "But she's still your mother, Sally. That's not something you can just erase." Sally's jaw tightened, her eyes hard. "Maybe not, but I don't have to let her back into my life either." I didn't push her. She was still processing her own hurt, and I knew it would take time for her to come to terms with what had happened. The turning point came a few weeks later when I received a letter from Annie's lawyer. It was a list of demands, everything from spousal support to a portion of my retirement fund. I stared at the letter in disbelief, anger bubbling up inside me. "She's delusional," Rhonda said when I showed her the letter. "And desperate. Don't worry, Arthur. We've got this." True to her word, Rhonda went to work dismantling Annie's claims piece by piece. She uncovered discrepancies in Annie's financial records, evidence that Paul had been siphoning money from her accounts. The irony was almost too much to bear. Annie had thrown away our marriage for a man who was using her, and now she was paying the price. When Annie learned what Rhonda had found, she called me. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since that night in the kitchen. She sounded different. Not angry or defiant, but tired. Defeated. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know about Paul. I didn't know he was—" I cut her off. "It doesn't matter now, Annie. You made your choice." She fell silent, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. In the weeks that followed, Rhonda continued to press our advantage. She froze Annie's assets and filed counterclaims that left her with little room to maneuver. Meanwhile, Tina and I grew closer. She had a way of making me feel like myself again, like I wasn't defined by what had happened with Annie. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, Tina leaned over and kissed me. It wasn't unexpected. We'd been inching toward that moment for weeks, but it still caught me off guard. Her lips were warm and soft, her touch gentle but firm. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. "I'm not trying to rush you," Tina said after we pulled apart. "But I want you to know how I feel." I looked into her eyes, and for the first time, I saw a future that didn't include Annie, a future where I could be happy again. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Annie's desperation became more apparent. She sent messages through her lawyer asking for meetings, trying to renegotiate. Each time I let Rhonda handle it. I had nothing left to say to Annie. My focus was on rebuilding my life one step at a time, and then one day, it was over. The divorce was finalized, and Annie was out of my life for good. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I could breathe again. Sally and I celebrated that night with pizza and ice cream, laughing like we hadn't in months. Tina joined us, her presence a steady anchor in this new chapter of my life. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. Annie's betrayal had broken me, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing. And with the people who loved me by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks after the divorce became a whirlwind of change, both practical and emotional. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a vast, unfamiliar landscape, unsure of where to begin. The weight of Annie's betrayal lingered, but the finality of the divorce brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Sally and I settled into a new routine, one that felt more like a partnership than a traditional father-daughter relationship. She took on more responsibilities around the house and made it her mission to keep me occupied, whether it was with home improvement projects, long walks, or just sitting together watching old movies. "I'm not going to let you turn into some sad, lonely old man," she teased one afternoon as we painted the kitchen. Her voice was light, but her eyes held a seriousness that broke my heart a little. "I'm not planning on it," I replied, forcing a smile. "Besides, I've got you to keep me in line." "You better believe it," she said with a grin, flicking paint at me. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A real, belly-deep laugh that felt like a small victory. Tina continued to be a steady presence in my life. She visited often, bringing little gifts or just sitting with me, her calm energy a balm to my frayed nerves. One evening, she brought over a bottle of wine and a stack of takeout menus. "Tonight, we're not thinking about anything serious," she announced, setting the wine and menus on the table. No exes, no work stress, no life drama, just good food and better company. I smiled, grateful for her efforts to pull me out of my head. We spent the evening sharing stories, laughing, and eating far more than we should have. By the time Tina left, I felt lighter, as though some of the weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. It wasn't long before our friendship began to shift into something more. Tina had a way of making me feel seen, not as the broken man left behind by his wife, but as someone worth knowing. She didn't pity me or try to fix me. Instead, she simply offered her presence, her kindness, and her steady belief in my ability to heal. The first true test of my resolve came when I received a call from Annie. It was late in the evening and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Arthur," she began, her voice tentative. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to talk to you." I didn't respond immediately, unsure of where she was going with this. I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Paul wasn't who I thought he was. He took the money and left me with nothing." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in the fact that she was now facing the consequences of her choices. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for so many years, couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Annie," I replied, my tone measured. "You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." She let out a shaky breath. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Arthur. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. The silence between us was deafening, and eventually she hung up. That conversation stayed with me for days, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I didn't want to care about Annie anymore, but I couldn't completely shut off the part of me that had once loved her. Still, I knew that any chance of reconciliation was impossible. Too much had been broken, and there was no putting it back together. As I navigated the complexities of moving on, Tina became an even more integral part of my life. We started spending more time together, not just as friends, but as something more. She had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, whether it was a simple dinner at home or a walk through the park. Her laughter was infectious, her presence a constant reminder that life could still hold joy. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Tina reached for my hand. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it sent a warmth through me that I hadn't felt in years. I turned to her, and she smiled, a soft, knowing smile that told me she understood exactly what I was feeling. "You don't have to say anything," she said quietly. "Just know that I'm here, for as long as you want me to be." I squeezed her hand, words failing me. In that moment, I realized just how much I had come to rely on her. Tina wasn't just a distraction or a rebound. She was someone who saw me at my worst and chose to stay anyway. Life didn't magically become perfect overnight, but it started to feel manageable again. I threw myself into work, finding a renewed sense of purpose in my role at Tina's company. My colleagues, who had always respected me, seemed to rally around me even more after learning about my divorce. Their support, coupled with Tina's unwavering encouragement, gave me the strength to face each day. Sally, too, was thriving in her own way. She had started dating a young man named Mark, a kind, soft-spoken musician who shared her love of the arts. Watching her build a life for herself filled me with pride. She was growing into a strong, compassionate woman, and I couldn't have been prouder. The final piece of the puzzle came when Rhonda, ever the bulldog, delivered the news that Annie's financial claims had been dismissed. Rhonda had torn apart every unreasonable demand, leaving Annie with little more than the bare minimum she was entitled to. "She got what she deserved," Rhonda said with a satisfied smirk as she handed me the paperwork. "And if she tries to pull anything else, she'll have me to deal with." I couldn't help but laugh. A genuine laugh that felt like the first step toward true healing. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. By the time the dust settled, I realized how far I had come. The man who had been shattered by Annie's betrayal was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I still had scars, emotional ones that would take time to fade, but they no longer defined me. Tina and I continued to grow closer, our bond deepening with each passing day. She had become my partner in every sense of the word, her love a steady light guiding me through the darkness. With her by my side, I began to see a future filled with possibility, a future I was finally ready to embrace. In the months following the divorce, life took on a new rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own ship, charting a course toward something better. Sally's unwavering support and Tina's steadfast presence made all the difference. They were my anchors, grounding me when the waves of doubt and pain threatened to pull me under. Tina and I grew closer as the weeks turned into months. Our bond wasn't hurried or forced. It unfolded naturally, like the changing seasons. We spent more evenings together, whether it was dinner at my house or hers, quiet nights watching movies, or long walks in the crisp autumn air. Her laughter became a sound I cherished, her smile a constant source of light in my life. One evening, as Tina and I sat on her porch watching the sunset, she broke the comfortable silence with a question that caught me off guard. "Arthur, do you ever think about what's next for you? What you want your life to look like now?" I turned the question over in my mind, unsure how to answer. For so long, my life had been about holding things together. My family, my marriage, my job. Now that the weight of Annie's betrayal was lifting, I was still figuring out what came next. "I think I just want peace," I said finally, "to feel like I'm living for myself again, and maybe to stop being afraid of starting over." Tina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Starting over isn't easy, but it can be worth it. Sometimes the things we're most afraid of lead to the best parts of our lives." Her words stayed with me long after that conversation. They echoed in my mind as I began to take tentative steps toward rebuilding not just my life, but myself. Meanwhile, Sally continued to thrive. Her relationship with Mark blossomed, and she threw herself into her music with renewed vigor. Watching her perform at a local recital filled me with pride and gratitude. She was proof that even in the face of heartbreak, resilience and passion could lead to something beautiful. But Sally's relationship with Annie remained strained. Annie had reached out several times trying to reconnect, but Sally wasn't ready. She still carried the hurt of her mother's abandonment, and I couldn't blame her. I tried to remain neutral, to encourage her to keep an open mind, but the decision was ultimately hers. One afternoon, after a particularly heated phone call with Annie, Sally stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger. "She doesn't get it, Dad," she said, pacing back and forth. "She thinks she can just apologize and everything will go back to normal, but it's not that simple." I placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her mid-pace. "You don't have to forgive her right now, Sally. Or ever if you don't want to. But holding on to that anger will only hurt you in the end." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again." "I get it," I said softly. "Take your time. Do what feels right for you." As Sally navigated her complicated feelings toward Annie, I found myself facing my own unexpected emotions. Annie's life had taken a downward turn since the divorce. Rhonda had mentioned in passing that Paul had left her after blowing through most of the money she received in the settlement. She was struggling, and while I didn't wish her ill, I couldn't muster much sympathy either. Then one day, I ran into her. It was at the grocery store, of all places. I was picking up a few things for dinner when I turned a corner and saw her standing by the produce section. She looked different. The vibrant, confident woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone who seemed tired and worn. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes loose and ill-fitting, and her eyes held a sadness that was hard to ignore. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, she spoke. Arthur. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. I nodded, acknowledging her, but saying nothing. How are you? She asked, her tone tentative. I'm doing well, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. And you? She gave a small, sad smile. I'm getting by. The conversation was brief, awkward, and left me with a strange mix of emotions. Seeing Annie like that didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, it filled me with a quiet sadness for what could have been, for the life we had built and the way it had crumbled. Tina, as always, was my refuge. She listened without judgment as I recounted the encounter, her presence a steadying force. You're a good man, Arthur, she said after I finished. It's okay to feel conflicted, but don't let it pull you back into the past. You've come so far. Her words were a reminder of how much my life had changed since Annie left. Tina wasn't just a new chapter. She was a new story, one filled with possibility and hope. A few weeks later, Sally surprised me with an announcement. She and Mark were getting engaged. The news filled me with joy, and I threw myself into helping them plan their wedding. It was a welcome distraction, a chance to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. As the wedding preparations unfolded, Tina and I grew even closer. She became an integral part of the planning process, offering her support and creativity at every turn. Watching her interact with Sally and Mark, I realized just how much she had become a part of our family. The day of Sally's wedding was a whirlwind of emotion. I walked her down the aisle, my heart swelling with pride and love as she exchanged vows with Mark. It was a day filled with laughter, tears, and the kind of joy that makes you believe in second chances. After the ceremony, as I watched Sally and Mark dance, Tina appeared at my side. She slipped her hand into mine, her touch grounding me in the moment. She's incredible, Tina said, her voice filled with admiration. You did a good job, Arthur. I had a lot of help, I replied, glancing at her with a smile. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the next generation take their first steps into a new life. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The months that followed were a time of healing and growth. Tina and I continued to build our life together, our relationship deepening with each passing day. Sally and Mark settled into their new life, and I watched with pride as they navigated the joys and challenges of marriage. And Annie? She remained on the periphery of our lives, her attempts at reconciliation sporadic but sincere. Sally began to soften toward her, their conversations becoming more frequent and less fraught. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but it was a start. As for me, I found that letting go of the past didn't mean forgetting it. It meant making peace with it, learning from it, and using it to shape the future. And with Tina by my side, that future looked brighter than I ever could have imagined. Life had settled into a steady, fulfilling rhythm. Tina and I were growing closer every day, our relationship evolving into something that felt solid, unshakable. Sally and Mark were thriving in their newlywed life, and I had started to find joy again in the little things: weekend barbecues, quiet nights with Tina, and watching Sally's career flourish. But as life moved forward, there was still one lingering thread from the past that refused to be tied up: Annie. She had become an almost spectral presence in our lives, neither fully gone nor truly present. Sally had begun taking small steps toward mending their relationship, answering her calls and occasionally meeting her for coffee. I respected Sally's decision, though I couldn't deny the complicated emotions it stirred in me. One afternoon, Sally approached me with a hesitant look on her face. I was sitting on the porch enjoying the crisp fall air with a cup of coffee when she joined me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Dad, there's something I want to talk to you about," she said, her voice cautious. I set my coffee down, giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" "It's about Mom," she began, her eyes darting to the horizon. She's not doing well." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean?" "She's struggling," Sally said softly. "Financially, emotionally. She admitted to me that she regrets everything, leaving you, choosing Paul, all of it. She said she doesn't expect forgiveness, but she wants to be part of my life again. And well, I think she wants to talk to you too." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to shut the door on Annie forever, to keep the life I'd rebuilt safe from her chaos. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good years we'd shared, couldn't ignore the faint echo of compassion. "Do you think she's sincere?" I asked finally. Sally nodded. "I do. She's changed, Dad. She's different. And I think it's eating her alive." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Sally. I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You don't have to decide now," she said quickly. "But maybe just think about it? For me?" I nodded, though the idea filled me with unease. "I'll think about it." Later that evening, I shared the conversation with Tina. We were sitting on the couch, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. Tina listened intently, her hand resting on mine. "What do you think?" I asked when I finished recounting the exchange. Tina took a moment to gather her thoughts. "I think it's up to you, Arthur. But if you're asking for my opinion, I'd say hearing her out might bring you some closure. It doesn't mean you have to forgive her or let her back into your life, but maybe it's an opportunity to put the past to rest." Her words resonated with me, though they didn't make the decision any easier. Still, I trusted Tina's judgment, and her perspective gave me a lot to think about. A week later, I decided to meet with Annie. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in town, a neutral ground where neither of us would feel too comfortable or too exposed. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. "Arthur?" she said softly as I approached. "Annie," I replied, taking the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened between us hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. "Thank you for meeting me," she said finally. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But Sally seems to think you're sincere, so here I am." Annie nodded, her eyes downcast. "I am sincere, Arthur. I know I don't deserve your time, but I needed to say this face to face." She took a deep breath, her hands still trembling slightly. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you. I let Paul manipulate me, and I let my own insecurities cloud my judgment. I thought I needed more, that I was missing out on something, but all I did was throw away everything that mattered." Her voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry for everything. For what I did to you, to Sally, to our family. I can't change the past, but I'm trying to be better. For Sally, if nothing else." Her words were raw, unpolished, and heavy with regret. I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, pity, but also a strange sense of relief. Hearing her acknowledge the pain she had caused didn't erase it, but it felt like a step toward something resembling closure. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, after a long pause. "But I can't pretend that everything is okay, Annie. What you did hurt me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I've rebuilt my life, and I'm happy now." I don't know if I have room for you in that life, but I'm glad you're trying to make things right with Sally. Annie nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I understand. Thank you for listening. We parted ways shortly after, the conversation leaving me emotionally drained but strangely lighter. It felt like a chapter of my life had finally been closed, even if the scars it left behind would never fully fade. Back at home, I told Tina about the meeting. She listened without interruption, her expression a mix of empathy and understanding. "How do you feel about it?" she asked when I finished. "Relieved, I think," I said. "It's not forgiveness, but it's something." Tina smiled softly. Sometimes that's enough. In the months that followed, Annie continued to work on rebuilding her relationship with Sally. They weren't exactly close, but they were making progress. As for me, I kept my distance, content to let that part of my life remain in the past. Tina and I were thriving, our relationship growing stronger with each passing day. She was my partner in every sense of the word, and with her by my side, I felt like I could face anything. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tina turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Arthur, do you ever think about the future? About what's next for us?" I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "All the time. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about it." She smiled back, her eyes shining with love. In that moment, I realized just how far I had come and how much farther I had to go. With Tina, with Sally, and with the life I was building, the future felt wide open, full of possibility and hope. The future Tina and I had envisioned together began taking shape with a quiet certainty that felt both comforting and exhilarating. Our days were filled with a mix of routine and spontaneity. Weekday dinners that turned into long conversations, impromptu weekend getaways, and the simple joy of just being together. Tina brought a vitality to my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. She had a way of making even the most ordinary moments feel special, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Sally's life, too, was evolving. Her relationship with Mark continued to flourish, and her career as a musician was gaining traction. She had joined a regional orchestra and was traveling more frequently for performances. Watching her on stage, pouring her soul into her music, filled me with a pride that was hard to put into words. She was living her dream, and I couldn't have been prouder. But as she thrived, I noticed a quiet shift in her interactions with Annie. They were meeting more often, sometimes for coffee, other times for lunch. Sally didn't talk about these meetings much, but I could see the subtle changes in her demeanor, a softening of the hard edges that had formed after Annie's betrayal. One evening, as Sally and I sat on the porch, she finally broached the subject. "Dad, I've been spending more time with Mom," she said, her tone tentative. "I thought you should know." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "How's that going?" "It's complicated," she admitted. "She's trying, and I can see she regrets everything. But it's hard to forget what she did. I want to forgive her, but I'm not sure I know how." Her honesty struck a chord with me. Forgiveness was something I'd wrestled with too, and I knew how difficult it could be. "You don't have to rush it," I said gently. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of it. Take your time, Sally. Do what feels right for you." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." While Sally navigated her relationship with Annie, I found myself growing closer to Tina's daughter, Clarissa. She was a bright-spirited teenager with a sharp wit and a big heart. At first, I wasn't sure how she would feel about me being a part of her mother's life, but she welcomed me with open arms. "You make my mom happy," she said one evening as we played a board game at their house. "That's all I care about." Her words warmed my heart, and from that moment on, Clarissa became like a second daughter to me. She and Sally formed a close bond, too. their shared love of music and mischievous humor creating a natural connection. As the months passed, Tina and I began talking about taking the next step in our relationship. We had been inseparable for nearly a year, and it was clear to both of us that we were building something lasting. One evening, as we walked hand in hand along a quiet trail, Tina turned to me with a smile. "Arthur, have you ever thought about getting married again?" she asked, her tone light but sincere. The question took me by surprise, but it didn't scare me. I had thought about it more than once. Tina had become my partner, my confidant, and the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. "I have," I admitted, stopping to face her. "And I think I'd like that. With you." Her smile widened, and she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a kiss that felt like a promise. We didn't rush into an engagement, but the decision brought a new sense of joy and excitement to our lives. We began making plans, discussing everything from the kind of ceremony we wanted to how we would blend our families. Sally and Clarissa were thrilled, and their support meant the world to us. Annie, on the other hand, was noticeably quiet when she heard the news. She didn't voice any objections, but I could sense her discomfort. Part of me understood. This marked the end of any lingering hope she might have had for reconciliation, but I couldn't let her feelings overshadow the happiness Tina and I had found together. The day of our engagement party was one of the happiest of my life. We kept it small, inviting only close friends and family. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, and the air was filled with laughter and the sound of music. Sally and Clarissa had planned a surprise performance, playing a duet that brought tears to my eyes. As Tina and I stood together, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The road to this moment had been anything but easy, but every challenge, every heartbreak, had led me here. A few weeks after the party, Annie reached out to me. She asked to meet, and though I hesitated, I agreed. We met at the same cafe as before, and she looked more composed this time, still a shadow of the woman I had once known, but steadier. "I heard about your engagement," she said as we sat down. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, my tone polite but reserved. She fidgeted with her cup, her eyes downcast. "I won't pretend it doesn't hurt, but I'm glad you found someone who makes you happy. You deserve that, Arthur." Her words surprised me. They carried no bitterness, only a quiet resignation. For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine compassion for her. She had made her choices, and they had led her to this place, a place of regret and loneliness. But she was trying, in her own way, to make amends. "I hope you find happiness too, Annie," I said sincerely. "We've both been through enough to know how precious it is." She nodded, her eyes misty. "Thank you." As I walked away from the cafe that day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Annie's chapter in my life was over, and I was finally at peace with it. My focus now was on the future, on Tina, on our family, and on the life we were building together. Tina and I were married on a bright, breezy spring afternoon. The ceremony was simple and intimate, held by a lake surrounded by our closest friends and family. Sally and Clarissa stood beside us, radiant in matching dresses, their smiles lighting up the day. As I stood there looking into Tina's eyes, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. She was my partner, my love, and the beginning of a new chapter I was eager to embrace. The months following the wedding were filled with the kind of joy I'd only dreamed of during the darkest days after Annie's betrayal. Tina and I settled into married life with ease, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. We found joy in the little things, Sunday morning breakfasts, quiet evenings on the porch, and the laughter that filled our home whenever Sally and Clarissa were around. Sally and Mark announced they were expecting their first child not long after the wedding. The news brought an entirely new kind of excitement to our lives. Watching Sally prepare for motherhood was a gift. She approached it with the same determination and grace that she brought to her music, and I couldn't wait to see her step into this new role. As Sally's due date approached, Tina and I found ourselves talking more about the future, our plans, our goals, and the life we wanted to build together. We'd started making small renovations to the house, turning it into a space that reflected our blended family. Clarissa had claimed a spare room for her art studio, and Tina's knack for design had transformed the once ordinary living spaces into warm, inviting havens. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tina turned to me with a smile. "Arthur, do you ever think about retiring early? Taking some time to just, live?" The question caught me off guard, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. Tina and I had worked hard for years, building our careers and providing for our families. The idea of stepping back, of focusing on what truly mattered, was tempting. "I do," I admitted. "But what would we do with all that free time?" Tina laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Travel. Spend more time with Sally and the baby. Maybe buy a little cabin somewhere for weekend getaways. The possibilities are endless." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and as we talked late into the night, the idea began to take root. Life was too short to spend it chasing deadlines and meetings. We had a chance to build something beautiful together, and I didn't want to waste it. The day Sally went into labor was a blur of emotions. Tina and I rushed to the hospital as soon as we got the call, our hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. When we arrived, Sally was already in the delivery room, Mark by her side. We waited anxiously in the hallway, exchanging quiet words of encouragement and speculation about whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. Hours later, a nurse emerged with a beaming smile. "Congratulations, Grandpa," she said. "It's a healthy baby girl." Tears welled in my eyes as the weight of her words sank in. Tina squeezed my hand, her own eyes shining with emotion. When we were finally allowed into the room, seeing Sally cradling her newborn daughter was a moment I would never forget. "She's perfect," Sally whispered, looking up at me with a tired but radiant smile. "Meet your granddaughter, Grace." I held Grace for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, and felt a kind of love I hadn't known was possible. She was a new beginning, a reminder that life's most beautiful moments often come after its hardest trials. As the months passed, Grace became the heart of our family. Sally and Mark were incredible parents, and Tina and I reveled in our roles as doting grandparents. Clarissa, too, adored her new niece, often spending hours painting while Grace napped nearby. Annie had cautiously begun to rebuild her relationship with Sally, and while she wasn't a constant presence in Grace's life, she made an effort to be there for the big moments. Her visits were cordial but brief, and I could see how much she was trying to tread carefully, not wanting to overstep. It was a strange dynamic, but it worked. One day, as Tina and I were packing for a weekend trip to the mountains, Sally stopped by with Grace. She sat on the couch, cradling her daughter, while I helped Tina gather our things. "Dad?" Sally said after a while, her tone thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how much has changed? How far we've come?" I paused, leaning against the doorframe to look at her. "All the time." She smiled, her gaze drifting to Grace. "I used to think what Mom did would define us forever, that we'd always be stuck in that hurt. But now, looking at Grace, at you and Tina, I see how wrong I was. We're stronger because of it." Her words touched something deep within me. She was right. Our family had been through hell, but we had come out the other side, stronger and more connected than ever. That weekend in the mountains, Tina and I found ourselves reflecting on everything we had built together. As we sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting a golden glow on her face, I took her hand in mine. "Tina," I said, my voice soft, "I never thought I'd be this happy again. You've given me so much. Love, hope, a new beginning. I don't know how I got so lucky. She smiled, leaning in to kiss me. You've given me just as much, Arthur. This life we've built, it's everything I've ever wanted. In that moment, I realized that every hardship, every heartbreak had led me to this, to Tina, to Grace, to a life filled with love and purpose. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed into something beautiful, a foundation for the future we were building together. Years later, as I sat on the porch with Tina, watching Grace play in the yard while Sally and Clarissa laughed together nearby, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't gone the way I'd planned, but it had brought me here, to a place of peace, love, and fulfillment. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I knew that the best was yet to come. Here's the next story. I never expected to fall in love again after being betrayed by the lady I believed to be my soulmate. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. This is the narrative of how I moved from being a bitter, furious divorcee to discovering unexpected forgiveness. It's a story of terrible betrayal and a journey that took unforeseen turns. I found myself with a woman half my age. But let me explain how I found up in bed with the young lady, unconscious of the alarming connection we shared. We must return to the beginning. Back to when I believed I had it figured out. Our life was pleasant for a few years, perhaps even better than it had been during our honeymoon. Emma appeared happy, but not quite satisfied. She started talking about all the fancy things she desired, things our meager wages couldn't cover. She'd frequently nag me about whether my father, whom she assumed was wealthy due to his ownership in the auto dealership, could help us out more. I suggested starting a family, but Emma was not interested. She insisted on waiting until we were rolling in dough before we considered having children. She had this entire idea to quit her work and become a full-time mother when the time arrived. We'd been married for nearly 2 years when everything fell apart. My father died of a heart attack while at work. I was selling old vehicles when I noticed a ruckus in the service department. I hurried over just in time to see my father draw his final breath. I was absolutely devastated only moments before the paramedics arrived. After my mother died, he was my rock. My sister Anna had just graduated from college a month earlier and was staying at home while looking for work. She was also struggling with her father's passing, but she has always been tougher than me. Emma had my back during the funeral preparations and for a few days afterward. She did not cry like Anna or I did, but she was there for me. However, once the dust had passed, she began asking me about Dad's will and when it would be made public. I complained to her about it, but she persisted. Emma, Anna, and I, along with an aunt and uncle from out of town, attended the whistle reading around 2 weeks after Dad passed away. I believe we were all surprised to learn this. Dad's part of the dealership was only 3%, and he had a second mortgage on the home. It turned out that he had used the mortgage money to acquire his share of the dealership. Long story short, his part was sold to the big boss for a sum we couldn't negotiate, and the mortgage was paid off. Anna and I were each left with around 10 grand. Emma didn't say anything, but I could virtually see steam pouring from her ears. That was the end of her sympathy and support. She became an entirely different person after that. I tried hard to rekindle our relationship, but Emma was as frigid as ice. 3 months after the whistle reading, I returned home to our terrible apartment to find Emma gone and a message on top of a stack of papers. The note was cruel. "Hello, Alan. I want children, but you can't support them in the way I desire. I'm out. I've withdrawn more than half of the funds from our tiny bank account, since I am leaving you with all of the furniture. Don't try to contact me. If you require anything, please contact my lawyer. His name appears on the divorce papers accompanying this note. Good luck, Emma." That is exactly what was written under the note. A stack of documents requesting a divorce because we couldn't agree anymore. I suppose that meant I wasn't the cash cow she expected, thus I wasn't worth sticking around for. I was only her first step toward a better life. I tried to contact her, but her lawyer insisted she didn't want to talk to me. My heart was in shreds because I truly loved this woman. How could I have been so ignorant to the truth that she had never loved me back? Thank goodness Anna was still in town and had a decent job. I couldn't afford the flat on my own anymore. I sold the furnishings and crashed with her for a while. Without Anna, I would have probably lost it totally. For the following 6 weeks, I simply went through the motions. Then I got out through the grapevine that Emma was living with a wealthy property developer and wearing pregnant clothes. I was extremely upset off now. I contacted her lawyer again and demanded to see Emma. He dropped another surprise. Actually, Mr. Easton, I was going to call you. Emma is pregnant and plans to alter her divorce petition to include a request for child support. I was stunned again. I recently signed off on a no-fault divorce, sharing our finances in the manner Emma had already arranged, with no alimony. Either way. At that point, something in me broke. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I growled at her lawyer. Tell that goddamn gold digger that if she tries to get child support, I'll demand a paternity test immediately and withdraw my assent to the divorce. I've heard there are ways to determine paternity before the child is even born. If it proves to be mine, I'll pay for the test. If not, she is going to pay for it. And I'm suing for divorce on the basis of infidelity and requesting child support. Also, we have a new asset split. I get it. Asshole! I yelled and slammed down the phone. I never received any official paperwork requesting child support because I knew the baby wasn't mine. But by the time the divorce was finalized 2 months later, everything of my love for Emma had turned into wrath and hatred. Anna arrived home from work to find me drunk off my ass and muttering, even through my booze-addled brain. I'd never seen her that angry. She called me every term in the book and basically ordered me to get my shit together and be relieved Emma, as she was often referred to, was no longer in my life. Anna immediately shoved me into the bedroom, closed the door, and cried, "Don't come out until you're sober." Dumbass. I passed out while wallowing in self-pity. When I awoke, I could smell bacon and eggs frying. Anna was in the kitchen. I contacted both of our jobs and told them we wouldn't be there until noon, she remarked, indicating for me to sit down and placing a plate of hangover food in front of me. Why? I asked, perplexed. Because we're going to have a conversation, which will most likely take some time to get through your thick head. What you should do. That is why she said. As I already stated, Anna was as tough as nails. Within 2 hours, Anna had persuaded me that I needed to relocate at least 500 miles away, obtain an associate's degree by attending community college at night, and either get over this bitch or seek professional treatment, if I could not. Within a month, I was out of there. I moved to an area where building was booming. I got a job as a handyman. I rented a cheap apartment and registered for night school at the local community college. After 2 months, as my body adjusted to manual labor, I realized I preferred being in better shape to playing soccer. I also realized that my high school instructors were correct to be upset with my results, since when I put in the work at community college, I discovered that I could be a great student. Even with night school, I completed an associate's degree in civil engineering and business. In only 2 school years and 2 summer sessions, I didn't date. I'd go out and party once a week, and while I did find someone to hook up with a few times, none of them could compare to Emma, so they never made me think of her. In fact, I was proud of how I had put her out of my thoughts. 2.5 years after my move, I got a manager position at the same construction company where I had begun as a laborer. I'd been tense with the foreman, and so with the owner. They both believed I had talent. My wage was now 4 times what it had been when I originally relocated, and I'd managed to save a good chunk of dough because community college tuition was so cheap. The weekend after I got my new job, I decided to indulge myself by hiring an escort instead of going for a random encounter. I discovered an agency through a friend who vouched for me. and I chose Renee from their website. Hicks. When Renee arrived at my apartment at 8 p.m. on Saturday night, she was twice as hot in person as in the images. She locked the door behind her, and we sized each other up without saying much more. Hello, my name is Renee, and I am Alan. Surprisingly, it was not embarrassing at all. My 2 crazy nights with her led to an unforeseen dilemma. I began thinking about Emma again. I remembered how wonderful my life had been at the time, as well as how badly I'd been treated. All of that rage and hatred resurfaced. My buddies began calling me out for being an asshole. I realized what was happening. My sister Anna told me I needed to see a psychiatrist. After a year of sessions, my therapist, Dr. Bennett, informed me I was the most angry patient she'd ever seen. Regular therapy wasn't enough. She claimed that only a major incident would bring me out of it. 9 years after leaving my hometown, my firm approached me about opening a new branch. There. Anna filled me in about Emma. She dumped the realtor who had stolen her from me, had another child, and was now married to a hedge fund guy. I rented a car from the airport to scout locations. All of the changes have left me feeling strange. I got a flat tire after driving 20 miles. I changed it myself and threw the lug wrench to the floor. Stopping at a red light near a prestigious private school, I noticed 3 small girls in uniforms waiting to board a limo. The driver had the door open when a black SUV roared up. 3 thugs jumped out, hit the driver in the head, and grabbed the screaming girls, their backpacks flying everywhere. The kidnappers were back in the SUV with the 3 girls before the light turned green. I didn't think twice. I floored it through the light, evading one car in the junction before ramming the SUV. My airbag went off, as did the SUV driver's. However, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was groaning in the front seat as the airbag deflated. I grabbed the unbuckled lug wrench, leaped out of the car, and dashed to the halted SUV. A man with a gun fell out of the back passenger side, but he was unsteady, and by the time he fired, I was on top of him. I hit him over the head with the wrench, and he collapsed to the ground. The 3rd thug climbed out of the driver's side back door, held a knife to one of the terrified little girls' throats, and demanded at me to drop my weapon. I looked at him calmly and spoke it loudly and clearly. If you let the girl go, I will let you walk. But you're not leaving this area with her. If you harm her, I will smash your nuts before killing you. You only have 10 seconds to make a decision. Then I'll come for you. With that, I lifted my left hand, checked my watch, and began counting. 1, 2. When I hit 6, he let grip of the crying girl and ran away. I threw the wrench at him and felt like a badass when it hit him in the back of the head and knocked him down. I jogged over, placed my knee on his back, and called for the astonished students from the school across the street to dial 911. The cops arrived 2 minutes later, indicating that someone had previously called. 2 male instructors from the school were holding down the SUV driver, who was still moaning face down, while 5 or 6 parents or other teachers comforted the 3 terrified small girls. The cops promptly handcuffed the 3 guys. They were all loaded into ambulances as I was treated for a bullet wound to my left arm, which I hadn't seen until one of the professors pointed out the blood. The man with the gun was down and likely dying. The other 2 were injured and bleeding, but nothing life-threatening. The limo driver was also treated on the scene as the ambulances drove away, and I was giving my testimony to the police lieutenant while the paramedic finished stitching up my wound. I heard a woman wailing hysterically as she ran towards the 2 kidnapped girls, saying, "Mommy, Mommy!" I took a few long breaths when I got a good look at her. Emma spotted me. After the initial shock, she dashed up to me yelling, "You bloody bastard!" "Alan, I know you had something to do with it. I know you kidnapped my daughters to get revenge at me, you piece of shit." Before I could respond, she attacked me and smacked me with her purse. The cop restrained her, explaining that I had saved her children, but she continued to curse. As I left to deliver my statement, I observed the females rejoin with her. I insisted that it be videotaped. The cops questioned how I got the wrench so quickly, and my statement was easily verified by my rental automobile. They asked if I could stay longer, but I refused unless jailed. I wanted an assault warrant against the woman who hit me. If rejected, media involvement will be threatening. My sister Anna picked me up. The kidnapping story was all over the news, but they couldn't find me. I visited a lawyer about suing Emma and looked into her arrest. That night, everything changed. A television network obtained security footage revealing my face during therapy. They praised my boldness, and I was soon known everywhere. Reporters found me, and I gave brief interviews that minimized my role. Emma acquired my sister Anna's phone number and left a voicemail apologizing and offering to meet up. I urged Anna to delete it and warned Emma not to call again before flying back. I met with my new lawyer and signed documents to sue Emma for slander and abuse. He was also pressing the prosecutor's office for Emma's arrest. I felt proud as I flew home, thinking more about suing Emma than about helping those girls at the office. Everyone commended me on my bravery and the lucrative assets I had discovered. My managers treated me to a lavish lunch, and I reveled in my newfound celebrity status. Back at work, I received a call from Bradley Simmons, the billionaire whose granddaughter I had saved. He promised me his personal assistance with anything I might need in the future. Many thanks. He also handled the matter with my wrecked rental automobile. I called the rental firm and spoke with its president, Catherine Timms. She informed me that I would not be penalized for the damages and even reimbursed my rental money. She admitted Simmons owned the corporation, but said they would have done the same regardless. Anna informed me Emma was attempting to reach her. Finally, Anna responded and told Emma to stop threatening her with harassment charges. Emma then constantly phoned my attorney, asking a meeting, but he insisted on handling everything professionally. While I was enjoying screwing Emma, it started to get expensive. I knew I'd have to appear for a deposition in the case I was suing over, and my attorney assured me Emma had the right to be there, but he could make sure I never had to speak with her personally. The phone rang when I was deciding which day would be most convenient for me to conduct the deposition. "It's Mr. Simmons," my secretary exclaimed eagerly. Wow, I gathered my thoughts. "Hello, Brad." "What up?" I asked. "Great. Alan. And you? Aside from my legal battle with my ex-wife, things are going okay? Even that is going well since I am making her sweat. But I don't enjoy how much it costs me. I need to attend a deposition and am trying to schedule it." "I rambled really hot," Brad said. I instantly felt embarrassed. "Sorry, Brad. I did not mean to dump all of that on you. It's only that your call occurred while I was looking at my calendar." I continued. "Well, Alan, we have a bit of a coincidence here. I'm calling to inform you that the mayor wants to hold a ceremony to recognize you with the City Hero of the Year award." Brad eagerly suggested that you time it to coincide with your testimony and receive reimbursed for travel expenses. "Brad, I'm not keen on publicity. I've turned down hundreds of interview requests, including one from 60 Minutes, but I can't believe the city would still pay my trip expenses. Ha ha ha." Brad laughed as he made his argument. "I have to be honest. I will pay for your travel expenses. But because the event is so significant to my granddaughter, Elsie insists on giving a public thank you speech, and I believe it is beneficial to both her development and rehabilitation from trauma. So, I ask you to come." God, Brad, I don't want to let you down, but I'm concerned. I genuinely dislike calling attention to myself. It would be quite uncomfortable for me. Brad interrupted me. "I got it, Alan, but here is the deal. If you arrive, I will not only cover your travel expenses, but also your ex-wife's legal fees, and I'll owe you double. I assure you that the fact that I'll owe you twice as much will be really helpful to you." I thought for a while. I probably stayed longer than I should have since Brad said so. "Are you still there, Alan?" "Sorry, Brad, I was simply thinking it over. Actually, you've made it impossible to say no, but you're not obligated to pay my attorney fees." "Fine. But I'd like to pay for your lawyer. I do not like how she is treating you." I didn't realize you had filed a case, but now that I know, I want to help. My secretary will provide you with instructions to pass on to your attorney, as well as potential ceremony dates. I look forward to seeing you, Alan. Thank you, Brad, I responded happily. Things were looking up. My lawyer was the happiest person I'd ever spoken to. When he called to let me know that Brad Simmons was covering all expenses, his personal attorney advised me to go all out and spare no money as part of my ethical responsibilities. I'm sure my attorney saw his bills had doubled. I have no doubt he will get it. The day before the ceremony, my attorney's office took my deposition. As expected, Emma Ashton was present. She tried to speak to me several times, and each time I did something extremely adult, such as covering my ears with my hands, as my attorney instructed her not to speak to me. Finally, my attorney warned opposing counsel that if your client tries to talk to mine again, I'm going to end this deposition, and you can explain to the judge why it should continue in these circumstances. Emma exited the room in tears. I grinned widely. The ceremony was embarrassing, but it was also exciting to meet Brad in person. His granddaughter Elsie's thank you speech was the sweetest thing I'd ever witnessed, and it brought tears to my eyes. Everything was fine up until the conclusion. After the ceremony, I was conversing with several individuals while holding my prize. When I had finished speaking with the mayor and turned to go, there stood Emma, Emma's second husband, and Emma's present husband, Kevin Ashton. I hadn't even known they were present. I was so surprised that Emma shouted out, "Ellen, I really want to thank you for saving my girls in." I shut her off. I spoke quietly while facing her. "Emma, screw you. If I had known they were your children, I would not have saved them," and then turned to leave. I felt great since it was the cruelest thing I could have said to her. That is, I felt fine until I noticed her kids standing off to the side, her face horrified and sorrowful, as if she had heard my comment. That's when I felt like a complete shit. The idea that two innocent little girls between the ages of 6 and 9 had heard my comment, which was not even true but was intended to upset Emma as much as possible, irritated me greatly. I was still thinking about it and how to make things right. 4 days later, my lawyer called. 2 pieces of positive news about the ruling. One is that opposing counsel has offered to settle. He said, "Shoot," and I replied. The judge ruled that we can provide proof of Emma's abandonment of you when she was carrying another person's baby in our damage report. That's a major victory, and it will put them on the defensive. Big time. "Great," I responded. My attorney recommended accepting the $500,000 settlement offer and dropping both cases against Emma. I reacted, insisting Emma admit her disparaging remarks were false. A face-to-face meeting with her daughters, as well as annual private conversations between my lawyer and the girls until they reach 18. My lawyer grinned. "I have no idea what you're up to, but that's okay." 2 hours later, they reached an agreement. I called Brad on his cell phone. "Alan, I owe you twice, so I'm happy to discuss." Brad spoke heartily. I detailed my plans for the meeting with Emma's girls and asked Brad to wire me $400,000. Brad responded, "Wow, you are even better than I thought. My assistant will send the funds to your business attorney." "Thank you, Brad. We are even." I said, "This does not count as one of my 2 debts." He chuckled. Emma and Kevin Ashton watched uncomfortably as the lawyer led her 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Jamie Ashton, aged 9 and 7, into the empty jury chamber at the courthouse. I smiled brightly when the girls entered, shook their hands, and demonstrated a trick. I'd been practicing for a week to get them in a nice mood, and then I explained why I wanted to meet them. "I wanted to tell you both, face to face, how proud I am to have helped you with those kidnappers. I know you heard me say something that wasn't honest to your mother, and I wanted to make things right," I remarked as I sat down and grabbed both of their hands. "Isn't it what you meant when you said you wouldn't have rescued us if you knew who our mother was?" Elizabeth began to smile as she inquired. No, that is not what I intended at all. You two are fantastic children. and I'd be honored to assist you at any moment, regardless of your parents' identities. But I genuinely dislike your mother for what she'd done to me in the past, and I said what I did solely to harm her, because of how she has previously hurt me. But I'd give my life to save you too." "Why don't you like our mother?" asked Elizabeth, pulling back her gorgeous strawberry blonde hair that was obscuring one of her piercing blue eyes. "It is not something you should be concerned about. You simply need to understand that it has nothing to do with either of you." I responded as kindly as I could. After that, the talk flowed well. Time flies by. After 15 minutes, I begged Emma's attorney for another 5 minutes. He agreed. "Girls, I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to assist you. I am giving each of you a present. Mr. Ames, my attorney has enough money to pay for your college education, regardless of what happens to your parents. If you ever need funds for anything college-related, simply call him and he will take care of things for you. Here's 2 of his business cards for you. Mr. Ames will call you on this day each year until you graduate from college. Check to see if you need money and how you're doing. My friend Lucy informed me that college is really expensive," Elizabeth said with wide eyes. "Yeah, it does. That's why I'm giving Mr. Ames the money so you 2 may go, regardless of what happens." Both females hugged me and kissed my cheek. Elizabeth had a tear in her eyes. "One more thing. Here are matching rings for us. I have already handed one to your friend Elsie. They're meant to demonstrate that we have a forever friendship. Because I assisted you. And you've helped me by bringing me more joy than I could have imagined from having the honor of assisting you," I explained. With that, I placed a colorful plastic ring on each of their right ring fingers, despite the fact that it was too large for them, and another identical band on my right pinky finger. They smiled, gave me another hug and kiss before leaving the room. Emma's attorney was floored. He nearly fell over when he saw his copy of the trust agreements, which set aside $200,000 for each of the girls to be doubled in 10 years and put in trust for their education, with the remainder going to them when they graduated from college. I was shaken up, so my attorney and I sat in the jury room for another 5 minutes before leaving. When we walked out, Emma's attorney had clearly explained what had happened to her and her husband, and she was sobbing, as if she were about to pass out. This would imply that she was taken aback by my generosity and understood that, while I despised her, I adored her children. I'll never know if those were her true emotions because I just walked away, waving to Elizabeth and Jamie shortly after my 42nd birthday. I returned to my hometown after settling my lawsuit against Emma 12 years ago. I saw my therapist once a year, and she said my hatred and anger toward Emma were completely under control. But I was still not in a serious relationship. This irritated my shrink, but she had no solution other than the possibility of a lucky break that would help me overcome this final obstacle. I'd been working for Brad Simmons on special projects for the past 11 years and was on the verge of becoming wealthy myself. Now Brad was pressuring me to open a business for him in my hometown. Because I didn't have the same fear of running into Emma as I did 12 years ago, I was looking forward to seeing Anna, Jeff, and my awesome 11 and 9-year-old niece and nephew as part of the process of starting a new business. I hired a public relations firm. Betsy DeStefano, a 22-year-old woman, was assigned to me. At first, I was disappointed that they had assigned such a young person fresh out of college to my account. But the president of the PR firm swore she was the best person for the job and that he would replace her if I wasn't satisfied. When I first met Betsy, I was shocked. She appeared familiar at first, but I quickly realized she was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. She was the most stunning woman I had ever seen in real life. Aside from Emma and Renee, she had long blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes, a cute upturned nose, full lips, and a physique straight out of Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. And she was the epitome of bubbly and friendly. Betsy was also a hard worker with excellent ideas. I spent more time with her than I should have because I was simply fascinated by her. However, the company got off to a great start as a result. Almost every day I asked myself why I hadn't met anyone like her. When was I 21? Her habit of touching my arm when she laughed nearly made me pee my pants. Her 3-month contract with the public relations firm ended. It was a sad day for me. I wanted to keep her on the job, but her company had other plans for her, and I couldn't justify it. If Brad questioned me about it. As Betsy and I said our goodbyes in my office, she blew my mind. Now that I'm no longer working for you, you could take me out to dinner and a show. She said this with a cobra-like stare at me. I stammered before I could respond. She hugged me tightly, whispered into my ear, "Call me or I will haunt you." She then parted her lips and slipped a piece of paper with her cell number into my hand. That evening, I invited myself to Anna's home for dinner. The kids were overjoyed to see me and the gifts I brought them. "Stop spoiling them," Anna scolded as they ran around the house, clutching Uncle Al's latest gifts. After dinner, as Jeff was putting the kids to bed, Anna asked, "What's up?" I recognized that look. "You want to talk?" "Yeah, I do," was all I said as we walked hand in hand into the living room. Anna was the only person on earth I trusted to be completely honest with me. Our love for each other was so deep that nothing could break it, allowing us to be totally frank. I told her about Betsy for the first time, even showing her a picture. "I think I've seen this woman, but I can't place her," she said, looking puzzled. "She's obviously a 10 in the looks department, and her personality matches her appearance." I picked up on that. Then I told her what Betsy had said to me and showed her the piece of paper with her phone number and a little heart on it. "Anna, be straight with me. Is it possible this woman actually finds me attractive? I'm more than 20 years older than her, and she could probably get almost any street guy she wants." Anna looked at me intently. Then she replied, "Seriously, Alan, you're good-looking, in great shape and loaded. It's possible." True. The odds are still fewer than 50-50, but it's worth a shot. In fact, I'd say if you don't try, just don't get your hopes up too high and keep your expectations realistic every step of the way. I grinned, stood up, dragged Anna to her feet, and gave her a great hug and kiss. "Anna, you're the best. Thanks for the meal. I gotta make a phone call." I walked out of the house to Anna's laughter as she closed the door behind me. When I went on my date with Betsy that Saturday night, I was scared as hell. Within 5 minutes, she had me at ease with her smile, bright eyes, easy chatting, and touching. Lots of touching. We had a fantastic supper. The discussion flowed like we were old friends. She held my hand for most of the concert as we were traveling home. She put her hand on my thigh and asked, "How about we spend the night at your place?" Her glance might have burned steel. When we got to my condominium, we headed straight to the bedroom. The following 14 months were the best of my life. Although Betsy occasionally reminded me that we were not exclusive and that if she got engaged, our relationship would terminate, she was the most loving, attractive, forceful, and lively lady in history. She was a virtual goddess. Betsy frequently went on dates on Fridays and Saturdays, and she occasionally went on weekend getaways outside of town. We nearly never discussed her other lovers. We attended dinners, shows, charity events, and even spent a 3-day weekend at the most expensive resort on the East Coast. I felt so pleased and satisfied with my life that I began dating 2 people. I met several people 5 years younger and 5 years older that I enjoyed being with. I never attempted comparing them to Betsy since it would be completely unfair to them. Betsy tucked me into bed on Thursday night and said, "We need to talk." "Okay," I replied, holding her hands in mine and noting for the first time the ring on her right pinky finger. It was too dark to see what it looked like. "You've heard me mention Eric, and you've met him once, correct?" she asked. I'd ran into Betsy and the 6-foot blonde man she introduced as Eric. One Saturday night, I was with a date at a restaurant. Betsy would occasionally mention him. "Sure," I responded, knowing where this was going. "So he proposed to me. I am in love with him, and I will say yes to him." On Monday. she murmured, staring me in the eyes. If you love him, why haven't you told him? Yes. Already? I asked with a lump in my throat. Because I told you when I initially started hooking up with you that once I got engaged, our relationship would end. And I want to have one final fling with you. I'd like to take you to a resort this weekend so you can properly say goodbye to me. Wow, I responded, absolutely stunned. That would be fantastic, but you don't have to pay, I replied when she interrupted me. I'm paying. I have enough of money, but I need to fully open your eyes first, so don't say yes right once, she said. Betsy then turned on the bedside lamp and held her pinky finger up to my face. The lamp's light illuminated a multicolored plastic ring. My thoughts was reeling when she continued, My name is Elizabeth Ashton. Destino is the Italian word meaning fake, which I solely use as a business name. Never in my life have I been so speechless. Emotions flooded my mind and body, and all I could do was gaze at her, mouth hanging agape. She understood I couldn't speak and continued. I never had the opportunity to thank you properly for saving my and my sister Jamie's lives. I was enthralled with the notion that you not only saved me, but also left me a trust money of $200,000. I needed to know more about you. I detected tears in her eyes, and mine became damp as well. When I was a teenager, I obtained a transcript of your testimony from your attorney and made him vow never to tell you. When I saw how my mother treated you, I was appalled and ashamed. That's when I decided I was never going to be like her. Even though Mother genuinely loved me and tried her hardest to raise my sister in me, I haven't been able to look at her the same way since Betsy. Elizabeth continued with a deep breath. I decided to make amends for how poorly she treated you by having some fun with you. I discovered you are an outstanding guy and lover and kept it continuing for my own satisfaction and to express my gratitude. And I have never sought to deceive you about our long-term prospects. I finally managed to speak. You are fantastic. That was all I could say as I hugged her tightly. After a few seconds, Betsy pushed me away, wiped my tears, and said, So, does this mean you'll come away with me for the weekend and let me spend some of the more than $300,000 I had left from the trust you established for me? You've given me the best present anyone could give. I told her as I began to regain consciousness, you sacrificed so much of yourself that you transformed my life. There is no more hatred or fury in my heart, only love and peace. I'd be honored to spend my last weekend with the world's most gorgeous person, both inside and out. That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings were the most bittersweet of my life. I wasn't openly depressed, despite the fact that I had to admit I loved Betsy. I was extremely delighted for her and grateful to her, true to her word. Betsy never approached me again after she accepted Eric's proposal, but we remained good friends. She even introduced me to my fiancée, C. Grace, a widow 2 years younger than me who manages the charity Betsy worked for. I saw no reason to tell Grace anything about Emma, because she was no longer a part of my life. Now. Grace and I went to Betsy and Eric's wedding 9 months after Betsy accepted Eric's proposal. Of course, I expected to see Emma there, but I wasn't concerned because I didn't have any hatred or wrath left in me. It was a stunning wedding and celebration, and I was overjoyed for Betsy. At the reception, I observed Emma avoiding me. I'm sure she assumed I'd bite her head off again if she tried to talk to me. I did, however, find Emma shortly before Grace and I left. She looked stunned when I approached her, having interrupted a chat with one of her companions and plainly expecting trouble. Emma? I said this while staring her full in the eye and holding both of her hands. I have to applaud you for raising the most amazing woman in history. Elizabeth is 1 in 1,000,000. I'm confident she could never have become the amazing person she is. If you had not been her loving mother, all the best to you. With that, I turned around and proceeded for Grace, leaving Emma in stunned quiet as I approached her. She continued, I believe Betsy's mother wanted to say something to you. She was holding out her hand as you walked away, and I believe I saw her mouth. I apologize. What may she have been apologizing for? No idea, darling. I responded quickly, escorting Grace out of the ballroom. Maybe she thinks I dislike the wedding cake. Here's the next story. It's coming up on Christmas. They're felling trees, putting up reindeer, and chanting songs of joy and peace. Oh, I wish I had a river to skate away on. The sugary lyrics of Anna McKinley permeated the air from the overhead speakers. Except for the final refrain, Laura Bennett barely noticed it. She wished she had a river to skate away on, to get them away from the hardships that had plagued them for the past year. "Mommy, I am hungry." That simple statement by 6-year-old Anna jolted Laura out of her despair and back to the reality of her situation. She and her daughter were homeless and starving. The mother and kid waited just outside the doors, leading from the underground bus and light rail tunnel to the flagship Nordstrom shop at Westlake Center in downtown Seattle. There's only one flight of stairs above street level. It was already dark, and the temperature had plummeted to the point that snowflakes mixed with the chilling rain. They had nowhere to go, and she was down to her final $5. Laura felt panicked for the first time in 35 years. Her spouse, Tom, died unexpectedly. She found him slumped over his desk in his home office the week after Thanksgiving last year. The medical examiner stated that it was a major coronary, most likely caused by stress and sedentary lifestyle. When they married 8 years ago, Tom was a programmer and engineer at Microsoft, with a promising future. Laura had previously worked in the marketing department of a large communications company in Redmond, near the Microsoft campus. They met at a Christmas party hosted by acquaintances. Laura was new to town, having grown up outside Minneapolis. A hit-and-run driver left me orphaned while I was attending college. She was completely alone because she had no siblings, and her parents had no siblings. After a series of marketing positions following graduation, she was finally offered her dream job and jumped at the opportunity to leave chilly Minneapolis for the Pacific Northwest. Tom was a dreamer with huge ideas, and she fell for his easygoing personality and self-deprecating sense of humor. He was a gorgeous man who was well-liked throughout the organization. Everyone said they were a good match. Laura's intelligence matched his and her model-like figure. Nordic features, violet eyes, and luxuriant auburn hair appeared to make them an excellent fit. After a brief courtship, they married and moved to a property just east of Redmond. She continued to work, and they settled into what passed for an east of Lake Washington social life, which was essentially non-existent given that they identified as workaholics and computer geeks. Everything changed when Laura became pregnant with Anna. She worked until a week before her due date, then took maternity leave. Unfortunately, her maternity vacation was repeatedly disrupted by work obligations. To make things worse, Tom was less than helpful. He still worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so she bore the full weight of being a wife, mother, and vital employee at work. When her maternity leave ended, the man's only increased. Finally, after the third or fourth occasion, her supervisor Caroline confronted her in public about unscheduled absences due to childcare issues, Anna's postnatal doctor appointments, and youngster diseases. She quit. Laura planned to do some consulting work from home, but she found that remaining at home with her kid made her feel incredibly liberated, and she believed they were financially secure enough for her to take enough time off for Sienna to attend preschool or beyond. Tom appeared to be helpful on the surface, but her extra income was lost, and her ability to spin without thinking about it was abruptly taken away. Around the same time, she realized he was becoming aloof, and her warnings about reckless spending and mounting credit card debt were met with cold animosity. "I make the money in this household, thus I should be able to spend it." At that moment, Tom took over the household finances and assured her that everything was in order. It was a lie. A few months later, Tom returned home and announced that he had quit his job to join some co-workers in relaunching their own business. He promised her that the clients would swarm and that they would never want her income again. That appeared to be true for a while. Tom was at home most of the time, working from his office, albeit he spent the most of his time there on the phone or on his computer. The financial situation seemed to improve, and Tom surprised her with a new Lexus SUV. Looking back, she recognized she was in denial, but she was loving her life as a stay-at-home mom. She brought Anna on playdates and spent hours shopping at the posh mall at Bellevue Square, where all the other bored East Side moms seemed to congregate. Unfortunately, she made very few friends. Shortly after Tom died, she realized he had built a house of cards. The day following the funeral, she returned home to find Tom's BMW missing from the driveway. She reported it stolen and, to her dismay, discovered a few hours later that it had been repossessed. That night, in the lonely house, she went to Tom's desk and realized that the financial disaster he had left behind was actually a tsunami of debt that would quickly sweep away her happy life. To her dismay, he had even cashed out his life insurance policy. To top things off, the IRS placed a lien on everything else for unpaid taxes. Laura glanced at the delighted folks who joined the crowds as they entered and exited the Nordstrom store. She had previously been a part of that scene, recklessly ringing up purchases with her platinum card. She now had no credit cards and no automobile. As of this morning, there was nowhere to sleep. "Mommy, I am starving." Anna spoke again. Laura unzipped her handbag and discovered the remaining granola bar packet. The purse was once valuable, but it was now out of style and she couldn't sell it. She opened the plastic wrapper and gave her daughter one of the 2 bars inside. She felt inclined to take a taste. She was hungry too, but it was all the food they had, and she knew that even a small bite from her would mean one less for Anna. She was also concerned that she might be unable to stop with a single taste. When did she last eat? Yesterday. Perhaps over the months she had sold everything in the house to keep the utilities running. Of course, the mortgage fell into default. Kindly. Wonderful. Mrs. Grayson, the widow next door, watched Anna after school while Laura searched for work. However, there were no employment, and promising leads tended to dry up as soon as they looked at her credit history. Oh yes. Employers nowadays had several options and were particularly interested in candidates' debt and credit scores. Laura eventually conceded defeat and applied for food aid. She was embarrassed when she went to the neighborhood's fancy grocery stores and handed up the Quest card issued by the state of Washington. Then 2 disasters struck. Mrs. Grayson suffered a stroke, putting her in a long-term care facility, and Laura's Lexus was repossessed. She had made a dumb error. She had played a cat-and-mouse game with the repo man, generally leaving her SUV in Mrs. Grayson's garage. But Anna was unwell that day, so Laura drove to Walgreens, parked in front, and hurried inside to get some medicine. She must have looked weird as she went out, keys in hand, to see her car on the back of a flatbed truck exiting the parking lot. She cried as she walked 2 miles home. By the time the school holidays arrived, the house had been stripped of furniture, and Laura and Anna spent the majority of their time sitting on the floor reading and playing board games. There was no television. The cable had been cut months ago in the huge screen, and high-definition television sold for pennies on the dollar. Her iPhone was rendered useless without service, so it was also listed for sale on Craigslist. She used the computer at the library and met purchasers outside a cafe, as she did with the majority of the items for sale, including all of the computer equipment. She even attempted to sell her engagement ring, believing a 1-carat diamond would fetch a high price, only to discover that Tom had betrayed her, as the gorgeous diamond he gave her for their engagement had been replaced by The ring was useless save for the gold setting, so she sold it in her wedding band and profited from the transaction. Her financial problems increased. She broke severed communication with several of her pals. She was ashamed and didn't want anyone to know how bad her condition had gotten. When she was eventually evicted 3 days ago, she took the little money she had left, packed a roller bag with their last few necessities, and walked down the street with Anna in the rain. Her personal outfit comprised of a broomstick skirt, a black cable-knit sweater, and black low-heeled dress boots. She was wearing pants, another sweater, and Nikes in the roller back of her raincoat. Why did she keep this dressier outfit? She believed it was a lifeline to the normalcy she had once known. Everything else had been sold, including Anna's gorgeous dresses and nearly all of her toys and books, and his backpack held a few outfit changes, her American Girl doll, and her 3 favorite novels. Without a plan, they boarded the first transit bus that came by. It was heading for downtown Seattle. Laura had no friends, no family, and nowhere to go. She was able to get a fairly small room in a dilapidated hotel near Pioneer Square. The second night was paid for with her food assistance card. Taking that card for accommodation was prohibited, but the leering proprietor appeared unconcerned and even implied, not so quietly, that she may stay as long as she wanted, but only if she entertained him and some of his friends. She was indignant, but humiliated to admit that in her misery, she considered it. The way he looked at Anna was what sealed the deal. Laura and Anna left early the next morning, taking the light rail to the airport. Fortunately, there were no ticket inspectors, so she and Anna took the hour-long round journey several times that day, staying out of the storm while she figured out what to do. Now it was past 4 o'clock. It was dark and freezing on the streets, and she had run out of alternatives. What would she do tonight? Tomorrow was Christmas, and everything would be closed, including the downtown library, which she had heard served as an out-of-door shelter for many Seattle's homeless. She'd never felt so hopeless. She only wanted to sit down on the tiled floor and cry. But she knew she couldn't do it because Anna would be upset. She had changed into the skirt and boots for their train rides and walks about downtown. She reasoned that as long as she maintained an air of respectability, she could appear to belong among the consumers crowding the stores and go largely unnoticed just outside the doors of such an exclusive establishment. Laura assumed she would pass for someone staying out of the elements while waiting for a spouse or friend to arrive. She would never pass muster with her East Side acquaintances if they didn't look too closely and notice she didn't wear any jewelry. The absence of jewelry would be detected in a heartbeat. All of her jewelry was gone, including the gold heart locket Tom had given her 2 Christmases ago. She thought she loved him, but his irresponsibility and carelessness had put them in an impossible predicament. How could he have done that to his family? "Mommy, might I please have some milk?" She gazed at her daughter's exquisite face. "Maybe in a little bit, honey." She tried not to cry as she said, "I am exhausted. Can we head home soon?" Laura knelt next to her daughter, and before she could respond, Anna whispered, "Santa comes tonight, doesn't he?" "Yes." She couldn't say anything more because her throat was strangled by the tears that had begun to flow. "And we have to get home or he won't know where we are, honey. Santa will find us regardless of where we are." She merely gazed at her mother while she ate her granola bar. Laura stretched out and held her, tears streaming down her face. She was suddenly taken aback. She watched the uneaten portion of the granola bar flying in the air as she drew in on top of her, and gripped her securely as they both plummeted. Laura ended herself on the cold tile floor, confused and trying to figure out what had occurred. She found herself staring up at gentle, dark eyes filled with compassion. They belonged to a man kneeling beside her as she attempted to sit up. "I'm so sorry. I am terribly sorry. Are you okay?" The loss of the last of her daughter's nourishment triggered it. Laura lost control and began to sob while sitting on the cold, wet track floor. Unsure of her mother's emotions, Anna stood up hastily and rushed to get the remnants of her granola bar, which had landed a few feet away. Laura felt his warm palm meet her icy one as the kind-looking man stood and offered to help her up. It was as if a bolt of electricity had shot through her. They soon found themselves standing close together as she struggled to maintain control. Anna grabbed her mother's hand with one hand while holding the retrieved granola bar in the other. She seems quite distressed. "It's okay, Mommy, don't cry." The man handed her a neatly folded handkerchief, which she used to wipe her eyes and face. He observed her with anxiety as she mustered the strength to pull herself together. As she did so, she studied him, a gorgeous face with many grin wrinkles and a few scars. Perhaps 45, a head taller than her, 5'8", short, dark hair, camel-colored cashmere overcoat worn unbuttoned over an expensive-looking suit. But it was those black eyes, so worried and sympathetic, that spoke to her. They appear to realize at the same time that he is still holding her hand. When he let go, she felt a sense of loss. "I am very sorry I did not see you there. Are you sure you're okay?" Laura nodded. At this point, they both appeared to notice the beautifully wrapped presents strewn about as a result of their crash. They almost clashed again when they attempted to get the identical gift from the floor. He laughed. It was a pleasant laugh, a warm sound that was natural and genuine. A sound produced by a humorous individual, this time of the year. "I'm always in a rush." He looked at her in silence, understanding he was expressing the obvious. "Could we start over?" "I am Marcus James." He grinned as he extended his hand. She paused for a few seconds, lost in those eyes, feeling like a schoolgirl encountering the attractive quarterback. He observed her. She reddened beneath his probing, wishing she had worn lipstick. She took his hand again, feeling the same spark upon touch. She felt faint. "I am Laura Bennett, Mama. My granola bar. It's all disgusting from the floor. Can I get another?" She noticed his gaze shift to Anna. "And this is my daughter, Anna." She wanted to take his hand back as he extended it to Anna in greeting. "I'm glad to meet you, Miss Anna." She beams at him. "I believe we can do better than granola bars. What say I take you and your mother to dinner?" He looked at Laura. "I hope you'll let me make it up to you, Mrs. Bennett. I feel terrible for running over you and ruining this young lady's snack." "Yes," she heard herself agreeing without hesitation, then her conscious mind kicked in. He was a stranger, and it was already dark. What if he is a criminal? However, those were not the eyes of a criminal. Wonderful. I hate eating alone. And I'd be happy to be seen with two such lovely ladies. He grinned and winked at Anna, who giggled back. "It's Miss Bennett these days. I'm a widow, but please call me Laura." "Oh, I apologize." She knew he meant it. It came from his heart, unlike so many others who offered sympathy without meaning it. Now, why did I tell him I am a widow? Clearly, a man like this would not be interested in her. No, she would accept his offer of a meal because her daughter needed it. Of course, she had to admit that the idea of eating in a restaurant on a cold, rainy night sounded appealing. She felt ashamed and considered asking him for money so that they could spend the night somewhere. Can she do that? Probably not, because he would think less of her, and for some reason his approval was more important than anything else right now. She never expected to see him again, but when they finished retrieving the gifts, she saw him call someone on his phone. She didn't hear the conversation. "I've got someone to come fetch the packages, so I don't have to worry about steamrolling anyone else," he said with a smile as he put away his phone. Laura noticed he wasn't wearing a wedding ring. She also noticed a little gray at his temples, which made him look quite distinguished. Within a minute or two, a young woman dressed in a dark green wool-fitted dress appeared. She was maybe mid-20s and stunningly pretty. The dress, with its just above the knee length and her high-heeled black boots, looked wonderful on her figure. "How may I help you, Mr. James?" The way she said it and her demeanor suggested to Laura that this woman would gladly drag him off to bed without preamble. Laura quickly reddened and almost unintentionally took a step closer to him, as if seeking to establish her territory. Prue, attempting to balance an armload of gifts, led me to trample this lady. Prue seemed to have to take her eyes from his smiling face to glance at Laura. They exchanged tight smiles, and she gave Laura a brief, dismissive once-over before she looked back at him. "Would you please have one of your elves to run them over to the inn at the market?" "Certainly, sir." She smiled at him and then spoke briefly into her phone. Within seconds, a young woman clad in a raincoat emerged and took the gifts. Marcus, she thought of him as Marcus now, gave the young woman some money and urged she take a cab to the hotel, which was only a few blocks away. "Will there be anything else, Mr. James?" To Laura, Prue's voice seemed laced with insinuation. Marcus seemed oblivious. "Thank you, Prue." "No, I do not think so. And thank you for all your assistance today." She smiled as he looked at her. "As usual, I got a late start and simply couldn't have completed it without your aid. When I see your father, I will tell him how well you are doing, and what a lovely daughter he has." Laura observed a little expression of dismay on her face as he mentioned her father. That was clearly not what she wanted to hear from this attractive man. "Merry Christmas, Prue. I hope to meet you again soon." Laura felt a sense of jealousy when Prue stepped closer and hugged him. "Merry Christmas, Marcus." Without glancing at Laura, she turned and entered the store. She was certain Prue exaggerated her hip movements as she walked away. Laura looked back at Marcus, who appeared to be amused as he watched her. She flushed under his stare. "Shall we go?" They took the escalator to the street, where he unfolded a large umbrella and extended his arm. She accepted it without thinking, as if it were the most natural thing. Laura grasped his hand and hoped he didn't notice how light the roller bag was. They arrived to the restaurant after a few minutes. She was happy to discover that it was Andalusia, a restaurant that served Mediterranean cuisine and offered shared plates and a variety of courses. She and Tom had eaten there before, some years ago, when visiting the Symphony in Seattle. "Thomas, I've brought 2 additional guests. Do you think we can fit in, Mr. James?" "Of course. These 2 lovely ladies are really welcome." He collected their outerwear and led them to a booth at the back. The dim lights, dark mahogany millwork, subdued hand-painted murals, and velvety materials all contributed to the intimate atmosphere. Above all, it smelled great. Laura was sad that she had to sit across from him despite how cozy the leather-covered booth was. She had appreciated the feel of his body and his scent as she clutched his arm as they walked to the restaurant. "Something to drink to begin?" Thomas inquired as he stood by. Laura could not drink any alcohol since she knew her empty stomach would be unhappy. Marcus suggested you start with a pot of tea. They have a good selection here, and maybe some cocoa for Anna. Anna gazed at Thomas. "Can I eat marshmallows with my cocoa?" "Of course. Miss, marshmallows it is, and a pot of tea for the lady and yourself, Mr. James. I'll join the ladies for tea, and you can bring some wine with dinner." "Very good, sir." Laura was perplexed that Thomas had not left menus, but she chose not to worry because she was secure and warm for the time being, looking forward to a delicious supper. Laura, sitting across from a lovely man who had a strange but delightful effect on her, wanted to avoid any queries that would force her to lie. She asked him, "Marcus." "Oh, don't you mind if I call you Marcus?" His eyes threatened to melt her as he grinned. "I hope you do, Laura." When he shouted her name, she felt a warm sensation go throughout her body. She remained speechless for a few moments. "Laura." "Oh, sorry. Simply lost in thinking." Actually, she had been staring at his lips, thinking what it would be like to kiss him. "I was wondering what drew you to Seattle tonight." Before he could respond, Thomas arrived with the tea and cocoa. He placed the cup in front of Anna with a flourish. Mrs. ordered cocoa with marshmallows. They spent some time preparing their tea. She noticed he took his plain with a lemon, as she always did. But tonight, she poured the cream and added some honey. She desired the warmth of the tea, but her body sought the nourishment of the milk and honey. She took a drink, and the steaming tea seemed ideal for such a dreary, wet night. How had he known? He took a sip, appeared content, then drank another as he glanced at her, possibly contemplating how to respond to her query. My newlywed daughter lives on Mercer Island. I work in a variety of locations across the world, but I currently call San Francisco home. I foolishly decided to drive up. I enjoy driving, and I spend my life on airplanes, so it's a convenient way to get away. Unfortunately, I ran into snow in the Siskiyou Mountains south of the California-Oregon border and had to spend the night, and we never found out who named the location, but it's not very big. I was fortunate to secure a motel room, so I was up with the snowplows this morning, and owing to all-wheel drive and the lack of troopers on I-5 in Oregon and Washington, I was able to drive the last 450 miles in record time. Laura smiled at him. He appeared so young when he talked about his vehicle journey. So I arrived in Seattle 3 hours ago and checked into my hotel, the Prue. Who did you meet? She works in a managerial position at the store and is a personal shopper, so she assisted me with gifts for my daughter and her husband, among others. She's a sweetie and the daughter of a guy who has been my mentor for several years. Laura kept her feelings about Prue to herself. At this point, the first course arrived. It was a cup of Tuscan tomato bread soup, which was delicious. Anna laughed as Thomas devised an excellent plan for presenting her soup. She grabbed up her spoon and plunged in. Laura tried not to eat too quickly. The soup, warm bread with hummus and tea, made her practically euphoric. When they finished their soup, Thomas offered pear salad. Then he placed glasses of albarino in front of them before the next course. It was a lovely white that paired perfectly with the shoot grilled chicken skewer. Next came a potato croquette. Then, paella, grilled fish skewers, and pumpkin risotto. The albarino was eventually supplanted by the Tempranillo grape. Anna had fallen asleep after a few nibbles of the potato croquette and was laying on the comfortable leather bench, head in her mother's lap. They completed the dinner with coffee, tawny wine, and a shared dessert of molten chocolate cake. Laura couldn't recall the entire conversation. It seemed trivial to discuss movies, novels, and other topics, but she soon learned they shared many interests. He was in what he jokingly referred to as the dirty energy business. She attempted to keep it light and focused on him, not revealing anything about her situation. Although he did manage to get out of her stories about growing up and attending school in Minnesota, coming to the Northwest for a marketing position, and wondering if trading the constant rain for the cold and snow was the best option. She only wanted this evening to last forever. For she knew that outside this cocoon of sensuous joys lay the raw weather and the brutal reality of her current existence. And he would leave her life as abruptly as he had arrived. Finally, he checked his watch. I need to apologize again. I have kept you late. Laura was jolted back to reality. How could she ask him for money after their beautiful evening together? She promised herself she'd do it for Anna's sake. How would he respond? Will he believe her story? And now for the awakened blinking. I was having a dream about Santa. Mommy claims that even if we don't have a home, he can find us using that sentence. Marcus stopped smiling. Anna, yes, he can. He knows where the good little girls and boys are on Christmas Eve. Laura could not look at him. She felt humiliated. No, a bill was presented. Thomas carried their outerwear and smiled as he led them to a waiting vehicle. The fierce wind whipped the freezing rain. Laura was perplexed when Marcus remarked, and at the market to the driver. Maybe he wanted the driver to drop him off and then take her elsewhere. But where will she go? She didn't have any money to pay the cabbie. They were at the motel in less than 5 minutes. Anna was asleep on Laura's lap when Marcus handed the cab driver some money and wished him Merry Christmas. The driver responded, "Thank you very much, sir, and a Merry Christmas to you." Marcus turned towards her. "We're here, Laura." She was perplexed. Where exactly was I? This was his hotel. He stepped out of the cab, turned to her, and said something. Her name is spoken gently. She was fatigued after drinking too much wine. Almost unconsciously, she took his hand. Feeling the comforting warmth, he grabbed Anna from her and carried her into the lobby, where he approached the registration desk. The desk clerk greeted him. "Mr. James, what can I help you with tonight? I bet my wife and daughter surprised me and will remain with me tonight." The attractive young woman stared at Laura and Anna, who was resting in Marcus's arms. "Very nicely, sir, and should I adjust your room service? Breakfast in accordance, please do, thank you." "You're welcome, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you. Stay with us and welcome, Mrs. James. And Merry Christmas to everyone. Merry Christmas to you, Bet. I hope you get to spend some time with your family tomorrow." She smiled at his thoughtfulness. "I leave at 8 a.m. and return home for a little snooze before heading to my parents' house at 4 p.m. for the big family meal." Laura wasn't convinced. The girl accepted any of the stories about her becoming Mrs. James, but she was beyond caring on this Christmas Eve night. She and her daughter would be secure and warm somehow. She also knew Marcus would not put demands on her while she was under the influence of alcohol. During dinner, she had dreamt about having his arms around her, which made her feel a little regretful. His room was huge, with a beautiful bathroom and a king-sized bed. The bed had been turned down and the room was barely lit by a single bedside lamp. He gently placed it on the bed without waking her. Laura came closer to him, looking into his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" The unexpected pain in his eyes startled her. He averted his gaze for a time, trying to gather his thoughts. He finally looked at her. "My wife died 5 years ago. We'd been married 19 years. I spent a significant amount of time on the road. However, she never complained. I was with her every day for the last 6 months while she deteriorated due to cancer. Every day I've been gone, I've regretted not being with her. I saw you today. I realized immediately away that you were in peril, and I admit that I was lonely. I still miss her every day." He paused. They were really close. She wanted to wrap her arms around him and make the anguish go away. As they stood in the dim lighting of his hotel suite. "My life is all about me. My daughter is now married and beginning her own life. I try to be considerate to everyone around me, and I give generously to charity. But I wanted to do something to help someone and make a difference in their lives. On Christmas. And so, Laura, I hope you will accept my hospitality tonight, and for whatever time you require." Laura got closer to him and laid her head against his chest. She moaned as she felt his arms slowly wrap around her and embrace her, and then her tears flowed. For a few minutes. They stood there while she sobbed on his chest, filled with bottled-up sadness for Tom and the life they shared, and relieved that this lovely, compassionate, and caring man had performed a miracle on Christmas Eve. Laura Bennett smiled and stretched like a cat under the feather comforter on the large, luxurious hotel bed. Marcus had loaned her a dark blue silk pajama shirt. She couldn't recall the last time she had slept so well. She woke up in the middle of a somewhat erotic dream. She and Marcus were seated on a rug in front of a fireplace in some sort of lodge, and the way he looked at her made her body tingle with the promise of sensuous pleasures. She became conscious of her surroundings. She realized she was alone in both the bed and the room. Suddenly, her mommy alarms went off. Where was Anna? Where was Marcus? All pleasant dreams and the comfort of her surroundings were cast aside as she sat up in bed in a panic. Has he taken her? Was he a monster who had brought her to this hotel solely to kidnap her daughter? Calm down. Marcus isn't a monster. There needed to be an explanation. She got out of bed and approached the French doors. A glimmer of light shone through the opening in the drapes. She pulled them open, and her heart jumped with relief. Marcus and Anna were outside, in the beautiful early morning sunlight. They were wrapped up against the cold, sitting side by side at a little table on the wide rooftop terrace outside the room, and Anna was laughing. They looked to be playing a board game. Both had insulated plastic cups in front of them, and Laura could see steam emerging from the hot drinks. Next to them was a small folding table containing what appeared to be breakfast dishes. Anna was dressed warmly with a down jacket, quarter-length slacks, red boots, and a winter white newsboy cap. Laura was perplexed. Where had the clothing come from? Her daughter seems peaceful and pleased. The sadness and anxieties of the previous days and weeks are long gone. Laura smiled. Anna looked like a Nordstrom ad. How do you deal with that, kids? She thought about Prue. Marcus was with me in the night somehow. I ordered clothes for Anna. Was that what the phone talks were about once they arrived in the room? He appeared to be a resourceful individual who was clearly capable of achieving results. Laura's stomach rumbled. How could this be? She'd gotten her fill the night before, so how could she be hungry? A black marble counter stood against one wall of the room, with a tray on top that was insulated. She opened the plates and found a variety of foods, including oatmeal, scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh fruits, all neatly cut. Next to the platter were 2 black carafes labeled coffee and cocoa. She made herself a cup of delicious-smelling coffee, added a splash of cream, grabbed a slice of nicely cooked bacon, and proceeded into the restroom while munching on the bacon. She looked in the mirror and noticed that the frantic and frightened woman who had greeted her just the day before was no longer there. Her current crisis-induced thinness gave her a waif-like appearance that many of her East Side acquaintances would kill for. Eat your hearts out, ladies. She ran a brush through her shoulder-length auburn hair, reflecting on yesterday's lovely evening and how it contrasted with the weeks and months prior. Laura undressed and changed into her pajamas once Marcus had settled into the bed. Anna moved very little throughout the process. Ah, to be young and able to sleep. The sleep of a child. Laura was exhausted and little tipsy, so she barely noticed Marcus on the phone. She really needed a shower. He nodded in understanding as she pointed to the restroom. Laura spent a lot of time there, allowing the hot water to relax her muscles. She also spent a lot of time shampooing her hair. They hadn't had hot water in a week before being evicted, and they spent 2 nights in a filthy hotel. Previously, the rust-stained fittings provided extremely little hot water, and the showers, cracked and moldy surfaces were unsuitable for spending time. When she finished her shower, she thought she could still hear Marcus on the phone. He was clearly successful at whatever he did, and he most likely had customers even on Christmas Eve. Dressed in a thick white hotel robe, her body glowing from the wine and the hot water, she couldn't bear putting on the underwear she had been wearing, so she decided to sleep in the robe. When she opened the door to the bathroom, she noticed a dark blue silk pajama top hanging from the latch. She took it off the hanger and returned to the restroom. Laura hung the robe on the hook on the back of the door and put on the comfortable garment. It reached her knees and clearly belonged to Marcus as she buttoned it. The smooth fabric stroked over her skin, giving her pause. She laughed at her mirror and remarked, "Laura, there is no way you can enter that room looking like this. What would Marcus think?" She frowned, attempting to recall the last time she and Tom had made love. He was always so busy, as was she, that they had little time for intimacy. Tom was a good lover, but they rarely saw each other at the end, and contact appeared to take the shape of text messages, despite the fact that they were frequently in the house together. Marcus had taken off his shoes and was seated on the little sofa wearing jeans and a shirt. He was just putting his phone away when she walked back into the room. He hadn't turned on any further lights since they arrived, so the room was still just lit by a little bulb near the bed. She felt self-conscious beneath his stare, aware that he was noticing more than she wanted. She quickly slipped into the side of the bed nearest the bathroom and pulled the covers up to her chin. If Anna hadn't been present, would she have tried to seduce him? Everything about the evening had been lovely, from the wine to the way he comforted her. Thanks for the pajama shirt. I was frightened of having to sleep naked. She reddened. Why did I say that? Actually, she likes sleeping naked. But after Anna was born, she started wearing pajamas. She frequently had to wake up in the middle of the night to care for her daughter. The pajamas were easier to find than a robe in the dark, and they were much warmer in the cold house at night. Unfortunately, Tom did not appear to care what she slept in. She blushed again as he said, "You look stunning in it." "The color suits you, and it's a cold night." Was he hinting at anything more? She paused for a moment before deciding to remain silent, resisting the impulse to stress that her reaction was not caused by the cold. "They have plenty of extra blankets and pillows," she said, swiftly waving to the sofa. "I will just stay here for the night." She hadn't considered her sleeping arrangements until that point. "Oh, I'm sorry for kicking you out of your bed. Will you be okay on the sofa?" He chuckled a lovely laugh. "Believe me, I've slept in much worse locations." Then his expression became serious. "It's a tiny cost to see you grin." She reddened again. Now it was his turn to use the bathroom. He approached the lamp, turned it off, and then came closer to her side of the bed. "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Marcus." Laura lay in the darkness for a few minutes. The clock read a few minutes after 10, still early, but she was exhausted, and with the meal, the wine, the hot shower, and, most importantly, the lack of stress about a change, she easily fell asleep. Laura absently brushed her hair in front of the bathroom mirror, reliving the previous evening. He told her last night that he was aware she was in jeopardy. How did he know she'd have to ask him? Was he her guardian angel? No, he was obviously flesh, and from how she felt last night as he held her while she grieved. Also, muscles. He had the body of an athlete, not a bulked-up ball player, but perhaps more of a competitive cyclist. And later, oh yes. Later, when she awoke and saw his restless body on the two little sofas, there was some light from the street lights shining through the gap in the curtains on the street-side windows. She got out of bed and approached him. She could tell that he was awake. Marcus. He sat up immediately, the blankets falling to expose his naked chest. "Laura, are you all right?" She hesitated before swallowing Marcus. "There's plenty of space on the bed." "I am fine." "Really?" She laughed and added, "That's nonsense. I'll simply move in over here. She will not even notice. And you can have that side of the bed. I should have thought about that sooner. Are you sure?" "Yes." Her heartbeat quickened as she spoke softly. Anna didn't move as Laura took her to the sofa, covered her, and kissed her precious face. She felt quite privileged to have her. She was a blessing. Soon, the two grown-ups were in bed. Laura, intensely aware of his proximity, was only inches away, but before she could think about it any farther, she fell asleep. She awoke later to find him spooned against her, his powerful arm placed protectively over her naked hip. She let out a satisfied sigh as she laid there. Sleeping in his arms seemed like the most natural thing in the world, smiling. She had fallen back asleep. As she relived the event, she glanced at the smiling face in the mirror, remembering the sensation of his body pressed against hers. Had she dreamed that part? She shook her head and nearly laughed. No, it was undeniably real. She couldn't recall ever feeling so safe, secure, and loved in her life. Loved? Is she falling in love with him? Did he love her? What rubbish. That thought was undoubtedly the fantasy of an affection-starved urban widow. She hadn't known him for a day yet. She shook her head, as if she could drive ideas from the night before. Laura exited the restroom in search of her clothes. She loathed putting on anything she brought with her because it all had to be washed. But there weren't many options. She opened the closet across the little corridor from the bathtub, and her breath caught her. A few pieces of clothes had been replaced by a variety of women's ensembles, including underwear, shoes, and purses. "Marcus, what did you do?" she asked aloud. Most of them still had Nordstrom tags attached. Prue, ever resourceful, strikes again. Laura wondered what Prue was thinking as she went through her store, selecting clothing and accessories for a woman Marcus had just met. Prue's hopes of a future with Mark have been dashed. Bad luck. Prue. I am not letting him leave. She spoke aloud, then chuckled at the silliness of the statement as she selected matching light blue panties and bra, slim jeans, and a soft red cashmere cowl neck sweater. All of the clothes suited her well. Prue obviously had a strong eye for size, given that she had only seen Laura for around 5 minutes, and much of the time she was fawning over Marcus. She put on ballet flats and walked to the French doors leading to the rooftop balcony, grabbing a slice of toast along the way and refilling her coffee cup. She halted, watching Marcus and Anna pour some chocolate from a carafe on the table, and they appeared to be having a heated discussion over something. Both were smiling. Marcus was wearing wool pants, ankle boots, a navy sweater, and a dark brown leather jacket. He definitely is a handsome man. Her thoughts drifted back to the night before, to the vision of the two of them spooning together. Laura's body tingled and shivered. "Good morning, you two, and Merry Christmas," she remarked as she stepped outside. The air was brisk, but the rain had stopped and the sun was now visible. It was wonderful. The balcony overlooked the brilliant blue waters of Elliott Bay, with the snow-capped Olympics to the west providing a stunning background. It was going to be a fantastic Christmas day, and she jumped from her seat at the table and raced to Laura. "Mommy, you were correct. Santa discovered us holding her daughter." She caught Marcus's attention and mouth. "Thank you." Laura approached the table, and he reacted with a faint smile and a shrug. She saw a game of chutes and ladders, which she had played as a child. She wondered where he found it in these days of computer games, especially on Christmas Eve. "Santa brought me this coat, hat, new jeans, and boots." She put one foot forward so Laura could examine a pair of crimson boots with faux fleece trim. Laura bent over to hug her daughter. "Very great. Clearly you were a good girl this year. Can we go open your presents now?" "My presents?" She turned to look at Marcus. He smiled and nodded. "I still have a present under the tree, but Mr. James advised me to wait until you awoke before opening the last one. So we played games and I ate oats and sipped hot chocolate. I believed you would never wake up, but Mr. James suggested you needed some rest, so we came out here. Can we go inside now?" All of this was spoken in a disorganized hurry, which most likely indicated too much cocoa, as much as the anticipation of Christmas morning. Laura grinned and nodded. Marcus climbed to his feet and approached Laura. "You look great. I hope everything fits." It was kind of a hurry situation. Laura hugged him and kissed his lips as Anna exited the room. What was only meant to be a quick kiss to express her happiness and gratitude. It took both of them by surprise and lasted far longer than they had anticipated. They fell apart when Anna's urgent voice from inside the room snapped them back to reality. They slowly eased their bodies apart a few inches, and their breathing began to return to normal. Still embracing her, he continued, "I suppose we should go unwrap presents." She never wanted him to let go, and she craved more kisses like the one she had just received. Speechless. Laura only nodded. He took her hand and gently guided her back into the room. She considered how she may have stood motionless on the deck for a long time if he hadn't grasped her hand. Laura watched her daughter on the other side of the room remove a present from the tree. What about the tree? How did he do that? It wasn't a real tree, but it looked convincing and was about 3 feet tall with glittering white lights. It was on a tiny table in the corner of the room near the windows. How did she miss it earlier? "Sit here, Mama." Anna pointed to an upholstered armchair by the window. Marcus watched with amusement as Anna handed her a foil-wrapped box. Laura was taken aback when she opened it and found an iPhone. "Oh, Marcus, thank you. How did he know I didn't own a phone?" It required a lot of willpower to hold back tears. Can I open my last present now, Mr. James? He glanced at Laura, who nodded. Okay. The thrilled girl shredded the foil wrapper. Elsa and Anna dolls. Anna was so happy that she leaped up and down. Even after a few years, Frozen remained her favorite movie. Mrs. Grayson's house was where she stored her last few toys, games, and books. I didn't get to ask Santa, but he knew nonetheless. Marcus spoke as she began to take the figures out of the box. Anna, I guess there is one more. He handed her a small box, and as she tore the foil wrapping, she exclaimed, Mommy, Santa brought Frozen 2 and 2 books about Elsa and Anna. Her smile seemed to brighten the room. Laura let a tear fall down her cheek. Anna approached the tiny table by the deck doors and inspected her. Elsa and Anna appear, leaving Marcus and Laura alone even though they are only around 8 feet away. Laura began to stand, but Marcus motioned her back to her seat. Santa also brought you some other gifts. He handed her a little silver-wrapped box. Inside was a simple gold ring adorned with sparkling red and green faceted stones. As she took it out of the package, a thick gold rope chain came with it. Marcus, this is too much. I cannot accept this. Anna received the clothes, phone, and other goodies from Santa. I honestly don't know. She sat there, tears streaming down her cheeks, staring at his concerned expression. He knelt beside her and seized her hands, which still clasped the exquisite jewelry. You know, Santa will be quite disappointed if you don't like what he brought. He had to think long and hard about what to give a special lady for Christmas. His eyes were gentle and kind, so she let go of his hands and placed her arms around his neck. She said, Thank you, Santa. Thank you for everything. He wrapped his arms around her. It's my pleasure, Laura. My pleasure. This time, the long kiss was not an accident. After the kiss, he stood holding her hands. He asked, May I? He nodded at the jewelry she was holding. She handed it to him, and he stepped behind her to hang it over her neck. It was the most stunning piece of jewelry she'd ever gotten. She stood and hugged him, feeling warm as he held her. Finally, as they parted ways, he remarked, Laura, I'd like you and Anna to join me for Christmas dinner this afternoon at my daughter's home. Still reeling from the gift and his embrace, she attempted to understand what he had asked. Your daughter's dinner? Are you certain? Yes. I believe you two should meet. I am sure you would like each other. Laura's heart raced at that statement. He wanted her to meet his daughter. That indicated he saw their future beyond Christmas Day. But what can I say about it? About? I'm talking about you being homeless and using your charm to persuade her father to take you out to dinner before seducing him into bed in his hotel room. His eyes twinkled with laughter. Laura flushed crimson. Yes, something like that. He smiled. Well, I believe it is important to tell the truth. This implies you won't have to keep track of everything you say. But won't she think I'm a gold digger? Laura was only half joking. Are you in? Of course not. She tried unsuccessfully to appear indignant. So, I don't think that's a problem. His smile was contagious. Laura stood and stroked his cheek. In that case, we would be delighted to join you and your daughter for Christmas dinner. He removed her hand from his face and kissed her palm. I'm happy. Marcus waited for a second, suddenly serious. Laura, here's my schedule. I'm not very good about going to church, but it's Christmas, and I feel really lucky. So if you and Anna don't mind, I will leave you alone for about an hour, following the events of the previous day's meeting. The concept of being separated from Marcus was incomprehensible. Marcus, I'm the one who should express gratitude. Can we join you? That would be very nice. When is the service? He looked at his watch. Mass at St. James begins in a little over an hour at noon, with a building sense of apprehension. She mentioned an hour. When do we need to leave? If we take a cab, we should be able to leave in around 40 minutes. Oh my, way to give a lady a caution. She smiled as she said it and dashed for the restroom. Before closing the door, she murmured, "Please choose something appropriate for me to wear." They got to Mass with 5 minutes to spare. Laura was thrilled with the dark blue wool dress he chose for her, albeit the black boots' very high heels caused her some difficulties. She wondered if these were Prue's revenge, and she was relieved to be clutching his arm as they entered the cathedral. She was not Catholic, but she felt at ease in the enormous church. Even Anna was quiet in this gorgeous setting. Marcus held her hand throughout the service as she sat with Marcus and Anna in the lovely church on Christmas, listening to the gospel account of the Savior's birth. She felt strong feelings. There was anguish over what she had lost. Anna is grateful and happy to have been rescued by the man sat next to her. Laura praised God for bringing her Marcus, when everything felt hopeless. They remained silent as Mass concluded, each preoccupied with his or her own thoughts. Even Anna seems to have been affected by the service. Marcus James, an old priest, approached them right outside the church. "Is this indeed you?" "Hello, Father. Patrick?" "Yes, it is actually me," he replied with a smile. "Are you still jonesing about the world and crawling around oil platforms?" "No, too old. Nowadays, that's a game for young men," he chuckled. "Marcus, it feels like ages since I last saw you. How long?" "Oh, I just remembered a tragedy." She noticed Marcus's eyes flicker with pain. Their last meeting must have been related to the death of his wife. "Father Patrick, please allow me to meet my friend Laura Bennett and her daughter Anna." The priest took her hand into his. His hand was warm and his hold was powerful. "Miss Bennett, I'm really glad to meet you. I pray your positive influence brought Marcus back to God's house on Christmas Day." Laura smiled. "No, Father. This was his concept. But we were more than eager to accompany him. My daughter and I have a lot to be thankful for, particularly this Christmas. Marcus contributed to what I will always consider a Christmas miracle. He came when we needed him the most. For that, I will always be grateful." The old priest looked at the three of them and noticed Laura's grip on Marcus's arm. He smiled before taking their hands in his. "May God bless and keep you forever, and may you always be as joyful as you are today." He stopped, then released their hands and murmured, "Merry Christmas, Laura, Anna, and Marcus." "Merry Christmas, Father." Marcus was quite silent as the cab drove them back to the hotel. Laura wondered what that fortuitous encounter signified and how Marcus felt about the blessing they had experienced together. Father Patrick clearly knew Marcus and his wife. What was the importance of his blessing them as a couple? Did Marcus have second thoughts about her? Do his friends and family accept her? Or will she continually be compared to a 19-year-old wife and mother? When they arrived at the hotel, he assisted her from the taxi. Then he drew her to him, embraced her hard, and murmured in her ear, "Thank you, Laura." She had no idea what it was about, but it left her with a nice feeling and cleared up any doubts about their budding romance. As they packed, they prepared a room service meal of soup and sandwiches. A big bag appears, holding her new clothes. But first, she had to pick what to dress to dinner and meet Marcus's daughter. He wasn't much help, as is typical of most men. Finally, she settled on a long skirt of gray wool that fell just past her knee. Matching smoke gray tights, flat-heeled gray boots with straps, and a cream cashmere turtleneck created the ideal backdrop for her Christmas pendant. A black leather, fleece-lined bomber jacket completed this look. Laura was satisfied with the results. She had to admit Prue had excellent taste. "You look amazing." Laura flushed with his approbation. After saying their goodbyes, the personnel hauled their stuff away. They strolled out of the hotel to Marcus's huge black Audi vehicle. Laura buckled Anna into the back seat while the valet held the rear door. The interior was finished in the most understated gray leather. The valet then took Laura, seated her in the passenger seat, and walked to the driver's door, opening it for Marcus. She heard him say, "Thank you, Pete," and informed Joe and his detail crew. They did an excellent job. Oh, I will. They were stunned. I doubt they'd ever seen a S8 so nasty before. Sure. However, everything was cleaned up nicely. Both men chuckled as Marcus took the wheel and Pete closed the door. He grinned at her, knowing she overheard the chat. Many people own wonderful automobiles, yet they would never drive them in the rain, let alone the snow. Well, I feel that an automobile should be driven, and I enjoy driving. Marcus seemed rather satisfied with himself. She grinned at the image of an astute businessman who was also a guy of paradoxes. He had taken in a poor lady and child solely on the basis that they were in peril. What business sense did that make? She hoped for none. It was a decision made from the heart. He reached over the center console to place his hand on hers, ready to connect with friends and family. She smiled. "I have girded my loins. Sorry, I missed it." His lips twitched. Laura laughed. There was little traffic as they drove east on the expressway to Mercer Island. Anna fell asleep, exhausted by the morning's activities. Morgan, my daughter, graduated from the University of Washington with an engineering degree. She is currently designing computer chips, or whatever is replacing them. Her husband? So, what can I say about Jake? Jake is a little older and appears to be a nice old boy from West Texas, but he graduated from the University of Texas Engineering School at the top of his class. He has an incredible analytical mind and is overall a great man. Furthermore, he treats Morgan like a princess. It's disgusting. He laughed. "So, do you like him?" She said this with a sense of fun. Marcus continued, "I told Morgan that if they ever split up, I'll keep Jake. Furthermore, it is my fault that they met in the first place." Oh. He gazed at her, smiling from the memories. I was on a Sunday trip from Austin to Anchorage, and Jake was sitting behind me. We started talking when we got to Seattle. Our connecting flight was canceled, so we had an extended layover. I called Morgan, who was just up the road at school, and asked if she wanted to go on a brunch date with her father. She said she'd come right down. I almost forgot to invite Jake. So we met at 13 Cents just across from the airport, and before we even ordered, those two were so caught up in engineer conversation that they barely saw me. By the time we'd spent 2 hours there, I'm very confident I could have strolled out without being seen. Love at first sight, he paused. Pretty much. Despite the fact that I knew engineers had different brain wiring, I was nevertheless shocked. They were married 3 weeks after she graduated. Of course, I thought she was too young, but Morgan understands her own thoughts and can make a decision. That occurred 1.5 years ago. Laura had always believed that love at first sight was exclusively for movies and books. She believed she loved Tom, but during the last year she'd had plenty of time to reconsider her thoughts. Of course, everything was influenced by the financial situation he had left them in. If it had been really love, they would have had a lot in common and the physical attraction would have existed, at least at first. They were of marriageable age. Therefore, had Tom not died, would their marriage have lasted? She did not know. Now she sat next to a lovely man whose kisses made her toes curl, whose sense of humor matched hers, and who had prioritized her comfort over his own, anticipating her wants. And Anna appeared to adore him. Most of all, she couldn't imagine being separated from him for even a minute. She wanted to believe in love at first sight, but she also knew that his coming would be like a night in a fairy tale, with giant rose-colored glasses firmly over her eyes. Was this what it was? Gratitude? No. Her deep feelings for him were far more than that. So how did he feel? He surely did the right thing. But was he still in love with his late wife? The manner he kissed her conveyed a lot. And he offered her to meet his daughter. Was that something? Or were these simply the dreams of a woman who was heavily influenced by those rose-colored glasses? Penny, he mentioned. Sorry. What? You appeared really serious for a moment, so I offered you a cent for your thoughts." Laura shifted on the seat to face him. "I apologize. I'm absolutely stunned by everything that has happened in the previous 12 hours. He looked at her. "I hope I didn't do anything to make you uncomfortable." "Oh, Marcus." She leaned over, putting her arms through his and resting her head on his shoulder. "You've been lovely to both me and Anna. I'm not sure how to thank you or how we'll ever repay your kindness." She felt him harden. "Laura, I never intended to bind you to anything." She clutched his arm closer, and as the tears flowed, she murmured, "Oh no, don't think. I had a momentary thought of you. I couldn't take it if you—" She buried his head against his shoulder. "Please bear with me," he asked quietly. She responded, "If you ever think badly of me, or if I did not believe you cared about me." At that point, they pulled into the driveway of a spacious single-story property situated back from the main road. She could see the waters of Lake Washington just beyond her residence. Marcus paused in front of the home and turned to face her. Laura. Her heart skips a beat. He stared at her for what seemed like an age. "Do you believe in love at first sight?" She could only nod as her tears streamed. He kissed her softly on the lips. "So do I." "Merry Christmas, Laura. Here's the next story. I honestly don't know how I ended up here. It feels like I'm in some bizarre alternate reality, and I can't help but feel frustrated. My own family seems to think I'm the one in the wrong, which is just maddening. I'm not here to ask for advice or hear what anyone thinks I should do about it. I just need to vent. Over 17 years ago, my ex-husband cheated on me. It wasn't with some random woman. I later found out that she actually knew who I was. He left me for her when our only daughter was just a baby. Looking back, I didn't even waste my time fighting for him. If he was going to make such a childish, impulsive decision without considering the consequences, he wasn't worth the fight. He married her. Meanwhile, I picked myself up, brushed myself off, and moved forward. For my daughter's sake, I committed to a healthy co-parenting relationship. He never apologized or expressed any regret. In fact, he once told me our relationship was a mistake and that she was his one true love. That alone was enough to make me realize he wasn't the kind of person I wanted in my life. Now the tables have turned. He cheated on her, and somehow she's trying to make me her confidant. It's bewildering. She's always been distant and cold toward me, and suddenly, I'm the person she wants to talk to about her problems. I wouldn't have even known about his infidelity if it weren't for my daughter casually mentioning it. She wasn't particularly bothered by it, so I didn't dwell on it either. My only concern was whether my ex could still host her on weekends as usual. Then came the barrage of messages. She started sending me long texts and audios explaining what happened. Mind you, I never asked. In the past, the only time we ever communicated was when I couldn't reach him directly about something related to our daughter. I've tried to keep my responses brief and polite, but it doesn't seem to deter her. No matter how dry my replies are, she just keeps sending more. The most baffling part was when she said, "You know how I feel now." Do I? That was 17 years ago. It's not even remotely the same situation. Let's be real. Her circumstances and mine couldn't be more different. I was a new mother whose husband confessed he'd been unfaithful for a long time. He told me outright that I was boring and didn't appreciate him. On the other hand, she knowingly married a man with a history of cheating, believing she was somehow different or special. I've done my best to ignore her, but even my friends and family seem to think I should entertain her. They say things like, "She must feel lonely," or "She wasn't to blame back then." The one that really grates on me is, "You should be more empathetic." We all need someone to talk to. Look, I get it. She's not to blame for his cheating, but let's not pretend she was innocent in all of this. She was a grown woman at the time, fully aware that she was having an affair with a married man whose wife was pregnant. She didn't care enough about me to warn me back then. So why should I feel obligated to support her now? Somehow I'm the bad guy for not wanting to play therapist. This isn't about feminism or solidarity. It's about basic respect, and she showed none to me when it mattered. Being cheated on doesn't define me, and I don't need to relive it constantly with someone who made her bed and is now unhappy lying in it. For now, my plan is to keep ignoring her. I don't care if people think I'm cold or unsympathetic. I don't have the emotional bandwidth to take on someone else's drama, especially when I didn't invite it in the first place. A few weeks ago, my frustration finally boiled over. I've tried so hard to be civil, but this situation has worn me down. It wasn't just her constant messages. It was also the voices around me, telling me I needed to be more understanding or compassionate. Even my mother, of all people, tried to guilt me into being her emotional crutch. My mother has a complicated history. When I was a teenager and even well into my adulthood, she carried on an affair with a married man. Their relationship lasted for years until he passed away, and as far as I know, his wife never found out. I've always suspected that's why my mother sympathizes with women like my ex's wife. She sees herself in them. She'd tell me things like, "You can't help who you fall in love with," or "They're soulmates, you shouldn't stand in their way." At the time, I was too young and vulnerable to see how manipulative that was. These days, I've distanced myself from her, but she still manages to get under my skin. My daughter spends time with my family, so I can't completely cut ties. Still, her attempts to justify this woman's behavior make me want to scream. Then there are my friends, most of whom lean toward a liberal feminist perspective. For many of them, criticizing women who have affairs with married men is seen as overly harsh or even misogynistic. They argue, it's the man who should be blamed, and we need to be supportive of other women. And yes, I agree with that in general, but not in this case. My ex's wife knew exactly what she was doing, and she wasn't some naive young girl being manipulated. She made a conscious choice, and now she's dealing with the consequences. A few days ago, after a particularly stressful day at work, I snapped. She sent me yet another long message, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I decided to finally lay it all out for her. I sent her a voice note, over 5 minutes long, which is ironic because I usually hate long audios, but I needed to say everything I'd been holding back. I told her straight up that I'm not interested in her life or her suffering. I reminded her that I'm not her friend and have no intention of being one. She never apologized to me for what happened all those years ago. So why would she think I'd want to bond with her now? I told her that she'd willingly married a man who had a history of infidelity, and she'd deluded herself into thinking she was somehow different. Her situation and mine are not the same, and I refuse to pretend otherwise. She didn't take it well, of course. What followed was a heated argument that left me emotionally drained. The last thing I want is to stir up more drama after all these years, but I couldn't hold back anymore. Afterward, I realized I needed to take a different approach. I forwarded one of her voice messages to my ex and told him to deal with it. I even went through the effort of listening to all the audios she'd sent me, and as I suspected, there wasn't a single apology in any of them, just endless complaints about her husband and how she thought we could bond over our shared pain. I told my ex to rein her in. I made it clear that her behavior was affecting our co-parenting, and if he didn't put a stop to it, I would have to take further action. He apologized, though I doubt it was sincere. He explained that they were in the process of working on their marriage and that she was still feeling angry and insecure. Apparently, they've been attending online conferences run by some self-help couple who claim to have the secret to recovering from infidelity. Honestly, I envy people who can profit off other people's misery like that. I told him it wasn't my problem. I'm not interested in her healing journey, and I'm certainly not going to be a part of it. I emphasize that my only priority is maintaining a peaceful co-parenting arrangement for our daughter. He reluctantly agreed to talk to her, and for the past few days I haven't received a single unsolicited message from her. The only message I've gotten was a brief note letting me know my daughter was staying with them overnight. That's all I've ever wanted, a professional, no-drama line of communication. I don't care what happens to their marriage. If they're happy, fine. If they're miserable, that's fine too. I just want to live my life without being dragged into their mess. They're both over 40, yet they act like they're still in high school. It's exhausting. For now, I'm enjoying the silence and hoping it lasts. I don't need their drama, and I refuse to let it invade the peace I've worked so hard to build over the years. Let them sort out their own problems. I'm done carrying other people's burdens. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened.